Fallujah, Iraq, November 2004. The desert sun hammered against the M1A2 Abrams tank as it rolled through the shattered streets of Fallujah. Inside the metal beast, Colonel William Iron Bill Garrett squinted at the cityscape through his commander's viewport. 58 years had carved deep lines into his weathered face, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning methodically for threats. 27 years in the Army had taught him that death waited in the shadows, especially in urban combat. "Contact right! Building with the blue door!" His gunner's voice crackled through the intercom. Garrett swiveled instantly. "Identified. Engage." The 120mm main gun roared, the entire tank shuddering as it sent a high-explosive round into the insurgent position. The building erupted in a cloud of dust and concrete. Through the settling debris, Garrett spotted movement on a rooftop 300 meters ahead. "Multiple hostiles, rooftop 11 o'clock. They've got RPGs." The radio crackled with urgent transmissions from the other tanks in his company. Second platoon was pinned down by heavy fire 2 blocks east. His executive officer's voice came through, tight with tension. "Thunder 6, this is Thunder 5. We're taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Jenkins's tank is hit. Mobility, kill." Garrett processed the information in seconds. His company was spread too thin, vulnerable in these narrow streets. They needed to consolidate. "All Thunder elements, fall back to phase line Alpha. Thunder 5, I'm coming to you." His driver responded immediately, the massive tank pivoting with surprising agility. Garrett had handpicked his crew, veterans who operated like extensions of his own body. As they approached the besieged platoon, an explosion rocked the street ahead. Jenkins's disabled tank sat smoking, surrounded by insurgents who were placing what looked like IEDs against its hull. "Crew evacuated?" Garrett demanded. "Negative, sir. They're still inside. Communications down." 4 men trapped in a disabled tank, surrounded by enemies placing explosives. The mission parameters were clear: secure the main supply route for the infantry battalion following behind them. Doctrine dictated holding the line at phase line Alpha, but doctrine hadn't accounted for 4 of his men about to be blown to pieces. "Thunder 5, maintain position. I'm going for Jenkins." "Sir, that's outside the mission parameters," his XO protested. "Noted. Thunder 3 and 4 covering fire." Garrett's tank lurched forward, accelerating down the debris-littered street. His gunner worked methodically, the coaxial machine gun chattering as it swept insurgents from the tank's path. 1 RPG streaked past, missing by meters. Another exploded against the front glacis plate, the tank's composite armor absorbing the impact. "Get us alongside them," Garrett ordered his driver. The Abrams pulled alongside the disabled tank, using its bulk as a shield for the stricken vehicle. Garrett popped his hatch, exposing himself to enemy fire. "Sir, what are you doing?" his loader shouted. "Covering their evacuation. Keep firing." Bullets pinged off the turret around him as Garrett provided covering fire with a service pistol. The hatch of Jenkins' tank finally opened, and 4 smoke-blackened faces emerged. The men scrambled across the small gap between tanks, diving into Garrett's vehicle through the loader's hatch. "Everyone in?" Garrett asked, still firing at muzzle flashes from nearby windows. "All accounted for, sir," Jenkins confirmed, coughing. "Driver, get us out of here." As the tank reversed, Garrett spotted a flash on a rooftop. Too late, he recognized the signature silhouette of an RPG launcher. The rocket streaked toward them, impacting just below Garrett's open hatch. The explosion was deafening. White-hot pain erupted in his left leg as shrapnel tore through it. The force threw him back inside the turret. "Colonel's hit!" someone shouted. Blood poured from the wounds in his thigh, but Garrett remained conscious. "Stay on mission," he growled through clenched teeth. "Get us to phase line Alpha." The pain was excruciating, but Garrett had weathered worse. As his loader applied a tourniquet, Garrett continued to direct the company's movements, coordinating their withdrawal to defensible positions. Only when all tanks had reached safety did he finally allow himself to be evacuated. The last thing he remembered before losing consciousness was the distant thunder of the tank's guns, still firing, still in the fight. Fort Hood, Texas, 6 months later. The retirement ceremony was everything Garrett had dreaded. Speeches filled with hollow praise, polished brass gleaming under the Texas sun, sympathetic glances toward his cane, a constant companion since Fallujah. For extraordinary heroism in combat, service above and beyond the call of duty, and 27 years of distinguished service to his country, We award Colonel William Garrett the Distinguished Service Cross and officially mark his retirement from the United States Army. The medal felt heavy against his chest, just another weight to carry. As the ceremony concluded, Major General Howard approached, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Hell of a career, Bill." Garrett nodded stiffly. "Thank you, sir." "How's the leg?" "Functional." 3 surgeries had saved it, but the Army surgeons had been clear. His days of active combat were over. The damage was too extensive, the nerve pain chronic. Howard lowered his voice. "Listen, Bill, I know retirement wasn't your choice, but I've got something that might interest you. Come by my office tomorrow morning, 0900. The general departed, leaving Garrett alone with his thoughts and the constant throbbing in his leg. That night, in the silence of his on-base quarters, Garrett removed his uniform for the last time. The man in the mirror looked like a stranger, still fit for his age, but with a body betraying him piece by piece. The shrapnel wounds in his leg were just the latest in a collection that mapped his career across 3 continents. He ran a finger along the scar on his shoulder from Desert Storm, remembering the burning Kuwaiti oil fields. Another jagged line across his ribs from Somalia. Each wound a memory, each scar a lesson learned. Combat was his purpose, his identity. Without it, who was he? Garrett's eyes drifted to the silver star on his dress uniform, awarded for actions in the First Gulf War. Beside it sat a faded photograph, a younger Garrett standing beside his tank crew, their faces blackened with oil and smoke, grins splitting their exhausted faces. 3 of those men were now buried at Arlington. The pain in his leg flared, and Garrett reached for the prescription bottle on his nightstand. He stared at it for a long moment, then set it back down untouched. Pain was preferable to the fog the medication brought. He needed clarity for whatever Howard had planned. The general's office was cooler than the sweltering Texas morning outside. Howard gestured Garrett to a seat, wasting no time on pleasantries. "How would you feel about staying at Fort Hood in a training capacity?" Garrett's expression remained neutral. "What kind of training, sir?" "We're expanding our target tank program. Need someone experienced to oversee the operation." Target tanks. The realization settled like a stone in Garrett's stomach. Tanks outfitted as moving targets for gunners to practice against. Obsolete vehicles driven around ranges for others to destroy. From tank commander to training dummy. "With respect, sir, I think I'll pass." Howard sighed. "It's not glamorous, I know, but you'd be training the next generation of tankers. Your experience would be invaluable." "My experience was in leading men into combat, not driving in circles waiting to be shot at." "This isn't a request, Colonel." Howard's tone hardened. "The alternative is full retirement. This way you stay connected to the armor community. Keep your security clearance. Unless you'd prefer civilian life." The prospect of leaving the Army entirely was worse. At least at Fort Hood, he'd be surrounded by soldiers, by the sounds and rhythms of military life. Garrett conceded with a curt nod. "I'll take it. When do I start?" "Tomorrow. Report to Range 7. You'll be overseeing 5 target vehicles and their crews." The following morning found Garrett at the vast expanse of Range 7, watching as 5 M60 Patton tanks, obsolete models from the 1960s, circled the range. Inside each was a driver, moving the tank through predetermined patterns, while gunners from the newest Abrams tanks practiced engaging moving targets. The tanks had been modified with additional armor around the driver's compartment and remote-controlled systems for the turret. From a distance, they presented a convincing silhouette of an enemy tank. Sergeant Major Frank Cooper, a barrel-chested man with 30 years of service, gave Garrett the tour. Each driver has comms with the range safety officer. When a gunner locks on, they get the signal to make evasive maneuvers. Makes for realistic training. Garrett watched one of the target tanks zigzag across the dusty terrain. "How many rounds do these things typically take?" Cooper shrugged. "Depends. We try to keep actual hits to a minimum. Most firing is with laser simulators. But when using live rounds, the critical areas are marked in red. Gunners are instructed to avoid them." "And do they?" Cooper's silence was answer enough. Accidents happened. Sometimes gunners got overeager or misjudged their aim. "I want to meet the drivers," Garrett said. The men gathered at the maintenance shed, a diverse group ranging from mid-30s to early 50s. Most were former combat veterans reassigned to less demanding roles. One face stood out, younger with the intense focus Garrett recognized from soldiers who'd seen serious combat. "Master Sergeant James Miller, sir." The man saluted crisply. "Second tank." Recognition flickered. Miller, 3rd Infantry Division, Baghdad, 2003? Miller's eyes widened slightly. Yes, sir, you remember? You were with Captain Reynolds' company, held the bridge at Nasiriyah for 18 hours. That was us, sir, pride-colored Miller's voice. Didn't know anyone remembered that action. I make it my business to remember good soldiers. Garrett turned to address the group. I want to understand what you do, how you do it, and how we can make it safer and more effective. Starting tomorrow, I'll be riding along with each of you. The next 3 months established a rhythm. Garrett rode with each driver, learning the intricacies of their dangerous job. He implemented new safety protocols, improved communication systems, and fought for better armor protection around the driver compartments. The work wasn't glamorous, but it gave him purpose, protecting the men under his command, even if that command was far from the front lines. Master Sergeant Miller became his most reliable driver, often staying late to help Garrett with improvements to the target vehicles. The younger man had a natural mechanical aptitude and an innovative mind. If we reconfigure the engine cooling system, Miller suggested one evening, we can add another layer of protection without compromising mobility. Garrett approved the modification, impressed by Miller's initiative. Over beers in the NCO club, he learned more about the man. Miller had a wife, Sarah, and a 12-year-old son, David, who dreamed of following his father into the Armor Corps. Like many career soldiers, Miller struggled with the balance between service and family. Sarah's been amazing, Miller confided. 17 years of deployments, moves, missed birthdays, never complains. But I promised her this would be my last posting before retirement. 2 more years, then I'm done, opening that auto shop we've been saving for. Garrett nodded, understanding. He'd never managed to maintain a marriage himself. The demands of his career had seen to that. 3 divorces had taught him that some men weren't meant for both family and service. He'd chosen service every time. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Range 7 was hosting a qualification exercise for a new tank platoon. 4 Abrams against 4 target tanks, live fire at moving targets. Standard procedure, with safety officers monitoring every aspect. Garrett was observing from the control tower when it happened. One of the Abrams gunners, a lieutenant fresh from training, tracked his target, Miller's tank, as it moved laterally across his field of fire. The lieutenant adjusted for lead, then fired. The round struck not the tank's main body, but the driver's compartment, one of the areas marked in red, designated as no fire zones. The impact was catastrophic. The round penetrated the supplemental armor, designed to deflect glancing hits, but not a direct impact. The control tower erupted in shouted commands. Cease fire! Cease fire, all positions! Garrett was already moving, sprinting down the tower steps despite the screaming pain in his leg. A medical helicopter was inbound, but Garrett reached the smoking tank first. The access hatch had been blown open by the force of the impact. Inside, Master Sergeant James Miller lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. Garrett climbed in, heedless of the risk of secondary explosions or ammunition cook-off. He reached for Miller's neck, searching for a pulse. Nothing. The medics arrived minutes later, pulling Garrett away to access the victim. Their efforts were perfunctory. The damage was too severe. Master Sergeant James Miller was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation was thorough and swift. The lieutenant had misidentified his target, firing at the wrong tank. A momentary lapse in concentration with permanent consequences. Garrett testified about the safety protocols, the training, the modifications they'd made. None of it mattered. A good man was dead. The funeral was held on a cloudless day at Fort Hood National Cemetery. Hundreds attended. Miller had been popular, respected. Garrett stood rigid as the honor guard performed their solemn ritual, folding the flag into a tight triangle before presenting it to Sarah Miller. Beside her, 12-year-old David sat stone-faced, refusing to cry as his father was laid to rest. After the ceremony, Garrett approached the family. Words felt inadequate, empty. Mrs. Miller, he began. Colonel Garrett, Sarah's voice was steady despite her red-rimmed eyes. James spoke highly of you, said you were making things safer for them. The statement cut deeper than any accusation. I failed him. I failed you both. I'm sorry. James knew the risks. He accepted them. David looked up, his eyes mirrors of his father's. Dad said you were the best tank commander in the Army. Said you saved your whole company in Fallujah. Garrett knelt, ignoring the protest from his damaged leg, to look the boy in the eye. Your father was a brave man, one of the finest soldiers I've known. He was going to teach me to drive when I turned 16, David said, his composure finally cracking. He promised. Garrett placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. I made your father a promise too, to keep him and his men safe. I intend to keep that promise even though he's gone. How, Sarah asked. By making sure this never happens again, to anyone. Walking away from the cemetery, Garrett's resolve crystallized. The target tank program was fundamentally flawed. Placing live operators in vehicles designed to be fired upon was an unacceptable risk, no matter the precautions. There had to be a better way. The summons to Major General Howard's office came 3 days after the funeral. The general's expression was grave as Garrett entered. Hell of a mess, Bill. The Army Safety Center is recommending we suspend the target tank program pending a complete review. They should. It's inherently unsafe. Howard sighed. Maybe, but it's also necessary. We can't train tank gunners without moving targets. We can't keep putting drivers at risk either. What do you suggest? Remote-controlled miniatures don't provide realistic targeting. Garrett leaned forward. Not miniatures, full-size tanks, remotely operated. No human inside. Howard's eyebrow rose. Remote-controlled full-size tanks? Do you have any idea what the development cost would be? Less than a wrongful death lawsuit. Less than the cost of another soldier's life. The general stared at him for a long moment. You're serious. Deadly serious. It can be done. The technology exists, drones, remote systems. It just needs to be adapted. And I suppose you want to lead this project? Yes, sir, I do. Howard shook his head. The Pentagon won't fund it, not with budget cuts coming down. Then we do it on a shoestring, proof of concept. Show them it works, then ask for full funding. The general's expression remained skeptical, but Garrett saw a flicker of interest. Howard had always had a reputation for innovation, for bucking the system when necessary. How much would you need for a proof of concept? $2 million, one working prototype in 18 months. Howard barked a laugh. $2 million? For a remotely operated 60-ton vehicle with all the complexities of a main battle tank? The defense contractors would charge $50 million, minimum. We don't need defense contractors. We need a small team of the right people. Howard drummed his fingers on his desk, considering. I might be able to scrape together $1 million from various training and safety improvement funds. But that's it, and if it fails, both our careers are over. It won't fail. Such confidence. Howard's tone was dry. All right, Colonel. Project Iron Thunder is yours. $1 million, 18 months. I want a functioning remotely operated M1 Abrams that can perform all the maneuvers of a crewed tank. M1 Abrams? Garrett questioned. Sir, that's our frontline tank. The program would never approve one for experimental modification. What would you suggest? An older model, M60 Patton. We've got dozens sitting in storage, perfect for conversion. Howard nodded slowly. Fine, you'll get a tank, a budget, and a workspace. The rest is up to you. I'm assigning you 5 personnel. That's all I can spare. I'll need to select my own team. Of course you would, Howard muttered. Fine, give me a list of names and I'll see what I can do. But they need to be people the Army can spare. No pulling combat-ready specialists from deployed units. Understood, sir. As Garrett left the office, his mind was already assembling the team he needed. Not the young hotshots or the politically connected, but the overlooked, the underestimated. People with something to prove and the skills to back it up. First on his list was Chief Warrant Officer Dave Doc Wilson, a crusty old helicopter mechanic he'd served with in Desert Storm. At 62, Wilson was the oldest active duty warrant officer in the Army, kept on because his expertise with complex systems was unmatched. Due to retire in 6 months, the Army had already written him off, perfect for Garrett's purposes. His call to Fort Rucker reached Wilson in the maintenance hangar, elbow deep in a Black Hawk engine. Iron Bill Garrett, Wilson's gravelly voice carried clearly over the background noise. Thought you'd retired after getting your leg shot up. Not yet, Doc. How'd you like to postpone your retirement for something interesting? Define interesting. Remotely operated tanks. A pause, then a low whistle. You always did swing for the fences, Bill. Who else you got? Working on it. Need an electronics specialist, a software engineer, and someone who really understands tank operation. For electronics, try Major Rebecca Harris at Aberdeen. Brilliant with control systems. Army's been wasting her talent having her teach basic electronics to recruits because they don't know what to do with a female electronics expert. Garrett noted the name. Software? There's a kid at the Signal School, Specialist Sam Reynolds. Been in trouble 3 times for hacking the training simulations to make them more realistic. They were going to court-martial him until they realized his improvements were better than the original code. And he'd be willing to transfer to an experimental project? For a chance to avoid a dishonorable discharge in a heartbeat. Garrett made the calls. Harris was cautiously interested, Reynolds enthusiastic. For his tank operations expert, Garrett had someone specific in mind, Sergeant Miguel Sanchez, a former tank commander who had lost the use of his legs to an IED in Afghanistan. Sanchez had been teaching tank tactics at Fort Knox, his combat experience wasted in a classroom. The conversation with Sanchez was brief and to the point. A chance to work with tanks again? For real? Sanchez asked, hope evident in his voice. Not just teaching theory to kids who've never seen combat. Real development work. Your expertise would be crucial. My wheelchair won't be a problem? Not for the job I have in mind. One by one, Garrett secured commitments from his chosen team. Each call, each conversation reinforced his belief that this project could succeed, not despite the odds stacked against it, but because of them. These were soldiers accustomed to overcoming obstacles, to proving doubters wrong. 2 weeks after Miller's funeral, Garrett stood in a cavernous maintenance bay at Fort Hood, watching as his new team assembled. Wilson arrived first, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile as he spotted Garrett. Just like old times, eh, Bill? Except we're both too old for this shit. Harris was next, her posture military perfect, her expression guarded. Reynolds followed, looking uncomfortable in his uniform, eyes darting nervously around the space. Sanchez wheeled himself in last, his upper body powerful from years of navigating life in a wheelchair, his eyes taking in every detail of the facility. Garrett looked at them, the aged warrant officer, the overlooked major, the troublemaking specialist, the wounded sergeant. Not the team most commanders would choose, but exactly the team he needed. In the corner of the base sat their project, an M60A3 Patton tank, its olive drab paint faded and chipped, tracks missing several segments. To most, it looked like scrap metal waiting for disposal. To Garrett, it was the future. Welcome to Project Iron Thunder, he began, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. What we're about to attempt has never been done before. A fully functional, remotely operated main battle tank. No crew compartment, no human risk. Why us? Harris asked directly. Because you're the best at what you do, Garrett replied simply. And because, like this tank, the Army doesn't fully appreciate your value. Sanchez wheeled forward, running a hand along the tank's hull. She's in rough shape, sir. That's our first challenge. We need to get her operational again before we can convert her. Wilson circled the vehicle, assessing. Power plants probably seized, hydraulics gone, electronics corroded. We're looking at a complete rebuild. Can it be done? Garrett asked. Wilson grinned. Give me a month and some spare parts. I'll have her purring. You've got 2 weeks. Our timeline is tight. Reynolds approached the tank cautiously. And once it's running, how do we convert it to remote operation? That's where you and Major Harris come in. We need to design a control system that can replicate every function a human crew performs. Harris nodded thoughtfully. We'll need actuators for the driver's controls, servo motors for the turret, cameras for visibility, and a secure communication system, Reynolds added. Can't have someone hijacking our tank. Garrett turned to Sanchez. Sergeant, you'll be our operational expert. No one knows tank movement and tactics better. You'll help design the control interface and test the system. Sanchez nodded firmly. I can do that, sir. Garrett looked at each team member in turn, seeing determination replace uncertainty in their eyes. We have 18 months and a limited budget to accomplish what major defense contractors claim would take years and millions more. The odds are against us, but every person in this room knows something about beating the odds. He placed a hand on the tank's hull. Master Sergeant James Miller died inside a tank that was designed to be shot at. He won't be the last unless we succeed. This project isn't just about innovation or saving money, it's about saving lives. Wilson stepped forward. For Miller, then. For Miller, the others echoed. As they dispersed to begin their work, Garrett remained beside the tank, his hands still on its cold metal surface. The path ahead would be difficult, the obstacles numerous. But for the first time since Fallujah, he felt the familiar surge of purpose that had defined his military career. A mission, a team, a chance to make a difference. The tank seemed to speak to him, its silent bulk promising possibilities. Project Iron Thunder had begun. That evening, Garrett returned to his quarters and opened a desk drawer he'd left untouched since his reassignment to Fort Hood. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with notes, diagrams, and ideas accumulated over decades of tank warfare. He'd started it as a lieutenant, recording observations about tank operations that official manuals overlooked. Over the years, it had grown into a personal doctrine of armored warfare. He turned to a blank page and began to write. Plans for Iron Thunder, questions to explore, potential pitfalls to avoid. His mind raced ahead, seeing not just the immediate project, but its implications. Remotely operated tanks could change the future of ground warfare, saving countless lives while maintaining battlefield effectiveness. As midnight approached, Garrett set down his pen and massaged his throbbing leg. The pain was a constant companion now, worse at night. The doctors had offered stronger medication, but he refused anything that might dull his thinking. Pain was the price of survival. So many others hadn't been given that choice. His gaze fell on a photograph pinned to the wall, his tank crew from Desert Storm, standing triumphant beside their Abrams after the 100-hour ground war. Young men, invincible in their own minds, believing technology and training made them untouchable. He'd learned better in the decades since. Technology failed. Training only prepared you for anticipated threats. But heart, the human element, that was the true advantage American forces brought to the battlefield. Could a remotely operated tank retain that advantage? Or would something essential be lost in the transmission between operator and machine? These were the questions that would define Project Iron Thunder's success or failure. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Entered, he called. Doc Wilson stepped inside, carrying a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. Without a word, he poured 2 measures and handed one to Garrett. Couldn't sleep either, eh? Garrett asked. Wilson shrugged. Old men like us don't need much sleep. Been thinking about the control system. We need something intuitive, something that feels like you're inside the tank even when you're miles away. Any ideas? A few, but first, a toast. Wilson raised his glass. To old soldiers and new tricks. Garrett clinked his glass against Wilson's. And to those who didn't make it this far. They drank in silence, 2 veterans with too many ghosts between them for casual conversation. Finally, Wilson spoke again. You know what I remember most about Desert Storm? That moment when we breached the berms into Iraq. 72 hours of continuous movement, the largest tank formation since World War II. The ground shook beneath us. Garrett nodded, the memory vivid. 3rd Armored Division. We were the tip of the spear. Damn right we were. Those Iraqi T-72s didn't stand a chance. Wilson's eyes grew distant. You know what I thought then? That it was the last great tank battle we'd ever see. That warfare was changing. It has changed, Garrett acknowledged. Urban combat, counterinsurgency, IEDs, not exactly what we trained for. But the tank endures, Wilson pointed out. Different role maybe, but still essential. And what we're doing with Iron Thunder, that's the next evolution. If we succeed, we will. Wilson's confidence was absolute. We've got something the big defense contractors don't. What's that? Skin in the game. We've been inside those metal beasts when the shooting started. We've lost friends. This isn't a project to us. It's personal. Garrett contemplated this, then nodded slowly. Personal, he repeated. That's what I need to remember when the bureaucracy starts throwing obstacles in our way. And they will, Wilson warned. The minute we start showing progress, someone's going to try to take control, to claim credit, or to shut us down for threatening their turf. Let them try. Garrett's voice hardened. I didn't survive Fallujah to be defeated by Pentagon politics. Wilson grinned. There's the iron bill I remember. Been wondering where he went after that RPG scrambled your brains. Just hibernating, waiting for the right battle. They finished their drinks in companionable silence. As Wilson rose to leave, he paused at the door. You know that when they told me you were putting together a team for some hush-hush project, I almost said no, figured it was just some Pentagon boondoggle, a way to keep you occupied until retirement. His expression grew serious. But then they mentioned Miller's death. I knew then that whatever you were planning, it mattered. After Wilson left, Garrett returned to his journal. He flipped back through the pages, through years of observations and experiences. In the margins of one page, a note caught his eye, something he'd written years ago during the initial invasion of Iraq. The future of tank warfare isn't better armor or bigger guns. It's removing the most vulnerable component, the human crew. He'd been thinking ahead even then, recognizing the direction warfare was taking. Now he had the chance to turn that insight into reality. With renewed purpose, he continued planning until exhaustion finally claimed him. The next morning, Project Iron Thunder began in earnest. Wilson and Sanchez focused on restoring the M60 to operational condition, a task complicated by the tank's decades of neglect. Harris and Reynolds started designing the remote control system, debating the merits of various approaches. Garrett coordinated, delegated, and fought the inevitable bureaucratic battles that accompanied any innovative military project. Days blurred into weeks. The team worked long hours, fueled by determination and the growing sense that they were creating something revolutionary. The maintenance bay became their world, the tank at its center, their focus. Progress came in fits and starts. The engine roared to life after 12 days of intensive work, drawing cheers from the entire team. The traversing mechanism for the turret proved more problematic, requiring complete reconstruction. Harris designed an array of servo motors to replace the human inputs for driving, while Reynolds developed a secure communications protocol to prevent unauthorized access. Garrett observed it all, contributing where his expertise was relevant, staying out of the way when technical matters exceeded his knowledge. Each evening, he updated his journal, recording successes, failures, and lessons learned. The project was taking shape, becoming more than just a concept. 1 month into the project, the first major obstacle appeared in the form of Colonel Richard Blackwood, director of the Advanced Robotic Combat Program based at Fort Benning. Blackwood arrived unannounced, accompanied by 2 civilian contractors from Quantum Defense Systems, a major military equipment supplier. Garrett met them at the entrance to the maintenance bay, blocking their path. "Colonel Blackwood, this is unexpected." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Colonel Garrett, General Howard mentioned your little project. Thought I'd see how it aligns with our own remote vehicle initiatives. It's still in early development stages, not much to see yet." "Even so," Blackwood gestured toward the bay, "I'm authorized to assess all Army robotics programs, including yours." Reluctantly, Garrett allowed the visitors inside. The team paused their work, watching warily as Blackwood and the contractors examined the partially disassembled M60. "An M60 patent?" One contractor raised an eyebrow. "Rather obsolete, isn't it?" "It's a proof of concept," Garrett explained, keeping his tone neutral. "The principles will apply to any tank platform." Blackwood circled the vehicle, his expression calculating. "Interesting approach. Of course, at ARCP, we're working with purpose-built unmanned vehicles, brand new construction, not retrofits." "At 10 times the cost, I imagine," Garrett observed. "Quality has its price, Colonel." Blackwood's gaze shifted to the workbenches where Harris and Reynolds had laid out their control system components. "Rather basic equipment you're using." Harris straightened, her professional demeanor barely concealing her irritation. "We're designing for reliability and simplicity, sir. Over-engineered systems fail in combat conditions." The contractor stepped closer, examining their work. "You're using commercial-grade servos. They'll never handle the torque requirements of tank controls." "They're modified," Reynolds interjected, "custom firmware and reinforced mounting brackets. We've tripled the standard torque rating." Blackwood turned back to Garrett. "Impressive ingenuity. But General Howard may not have mentioned that the Defense Advanced Projects Agency has already awarded Quantum Defense a contract for next-generation unmanned ground vehicles. $50 million in funding." "Congratulations," Garrett said flatly. "I'm sure the taxpayers will get their money's worth in about a decade when you deliver a prototype." The contractor bristled. "Our timeline is aggressive, 5 years to field deployment." Wilson snorted from across the bay where he was rebuilding a transmission. 5 years. We'll have this beast operational in 18 months. With an obsolete tank and commercial parts?" Blackwood's tone was dismissive. "I admire your optimism, but let's be realistic." Garrett stepped closer to Blackwood, lowering his voice. "What do you really want, Richard? This isn't a courtesy visit." Blackwood matched his tone. "Just assessing potential redundancies in Army research. Budgets are tight, projects get consolidated or canceled." The threat was clear. Project Iron Thunder was competing for resources and attention with Blackwood's better-funded, politically connected program. "We're not looking to compete with ARCP," Garrett said carefully. "Our focus is narrow, replacing human operators in target tanks, different application entirely." "For now." Blackwood's smile returned, cold and calculated. "But innovations have a way of expanding beyond their original scope, don't they? Especially successful ones." After Blackwood and the contractors departed, the team gathered around Garrett, tension evident in their postures. That was Quantum Defense, Reynolds asked. They're the biggest military tech contractor in the country. And they don't like competition, Wilson added, especially low-budget competition that might make them look bad. Garrett considered their situation. Blackwood's trying to intimidate us, maybe get us shut down before we can prove our concept works. Can he do that? Sanchez asked. Not directly, but he has influence, connections in the Pentagon. Harris crossed her arms. So what's our move, Colonel? Garrett looked at the partially rebuilt tank, then at his team. Each face showed concern, but also determination. They hadn't joined this project expecting an easy path. We accelerate, he decided. Double our efforts. The further along we are, the harder it becomes for anyone to shut us down. We're already working 12-hour days, Wilson pointed out. Then we work smarter, not harder. Reynolds, how's the control interface coming? The young specialist straightened. Basic functions are mapped. We need to integrate the visual feeds and fine-tune the response rates. Good. Harris, what's our biggest technical hurdle right now? Power management. The remote system draws too much current. We need to redesign the distribution network. Garrett nodded. Focus on those issues. Wilson, Sanchez, get the drivetrain fully operational by the end of the week. I want this tank moving under its own power, even if the remote systems aren't ready. And you, sir? Wilson asked. I'm going to have a chat with General Howard. We need to secure our funding before Blackwood makes his move. As the team returned to their tasks with renewed focus, Garrett felt a familiar tension, the pressure of command, of responsibilities weighing on his decisions. This wasn't combat, but in many ways the stakes felt just as high. They weren't just building a remote-controlled tank, they were fighting for the future of American soldiers. The meeting with Howard was tense but productive. The general listened to Garrett's concerns about Blackwood's interest, then made several calls to Pentagon contacts, reinforcing the importance and independence of Project Iron Thunder. For now, their funding was secure. But Garrett knew the reprieve was temporary. They needed results, and soon. That evening, as the team was preparing to end another long day, Sarah Miller appeared at the maintenance bay entrance, her son David beside her. Garrett crossed to meet them, surprised by the unexpected visit. Mrs. Miller, David, what brings you here? Sarah's expression was resolute. We heard about your project, that you're trying to make tanks safer to prevent what happened to James. Garrett nodded, wondering who had informed them. That's our goal, yes. I want to help, David said suddenly. Dad taught me about tanks. I know stuff. The boy's determination was so reminiscent of his father that Garrett felt a pang of emotion. I appreciate that, David, but this is a restricted military project. What he means, Sarah explained, is that James kept journals, technical notes about the target tanks, ideas for improvements, things he noticed during operations. She held out a worn notebook. He would have wanted you to have this. Garrett accepted the notebook with reverence. Thank you, this could be invaluable. And there's something else. Sarah hesitated. James had friends at Aberdeen Proving Ground, tank mechanics, engineers. I've been in touch with them. They want to help, off the books if necessary. Garrett considered the implications. Unofficial assistance could accelerate their progress significantly, but it also risked disciplinary action if discovered. Why would they risk their careers for this? He asked. Because they knew James, because they understand the risks of the current system. Sarah's voice strengthened. And because soldiers take care of their own, even when the bureaucracy doesn't. That night, after the Millers had departed, Garrett read through James Miller's notebook. The master sergeant had been more observant and innovative than Garrett had realized. The pages contained detailed notes on the target tank's performance, structural weaknesses, and potential improvements. Most valuable were Miller's thoughts on the human factors, the challenges of operating a vehicle designed to be targeted, the psychological toll of constant vigilance. One passage in particular caught Garrett's attention. The biggest problem isn't technical, it's psychological. No matter how much armor you add, the driver knows their bait. That knowledge affects performance, creates hesitation. A remotely operated vehicle wouldn't have that limitation. It could be truly aggressive, pushing the trainees to their limits. Miller had been thinking along the same lines as Project Iron Thunder, perhaps even before Garrett himself. The realization added another layer of responsibility. This wasn't just about fulfilling a promise to a fallen soldier. It was about continuing his work, his vision. The next morning, Garrett shared Miller's notebook with the team. The additional insights energized their efforts, providing solutions to problems they'd been struggling with and raising new questions they hadn't considered. 2 weeks later, the M60's engine roared to life, its deep rumble filling the maintenance bay. Wilson emerged from the engine compartment, his face streaked with oil but split by a triumphant grin. Listen to that beautiful sound, 50-year-old technology, and she still has heart. The team gathered around as Wilson climbed down. For the first time, their project felt tangible, real. The tank was no longer just a hulk of metal. It was coming live again. Track assembly is complete, Sanchez reported. Suspension needs adjustment, but she's ready for basic mobility testing. Control system? Garrett asked. Harris nodded. Primary functions are mapped. We can test remote engine start, steering, and basic turret movement. What's the range? Wilson inquired. 2 miles with the current antenna setup, Reynolds answered. We'll need a more powerful transmitter for operational use, but this is enough for testing. Garrett surveyed the tank, then his team. Their progress had exceeded his expectations, driven by their collective expertise and determination. Despite Blackwood's veiled threats and the constraints of their budget, Project Iron Thunder was advancing steadily. Tomorrow, he announced, we take her outside for the first movement test. Remote operation only. If successful, we'll be ahead of schedule. The team's excitement was palpable. After weeks of theory and component work, they would finally see the fruits of their labor in action. That night, Garrett updated his journal with a sense of cautious optimism. The project faced significant challenges ahead, but the foundation was solid. The team had coalesced into a cohesive unit, each member contributing their unique skills while respecting the other's expertise. As he wrote, Garrett realized that Project Iron Thunder had become more than just a technical challenge or a memorial to Master Sergeant Miller. It represented a philosophy of warfare that valued human life above all else, that sought to maintain combat effectiveness while removing soldiers from unnecessary risk. In a military increasingly defined by technology, this principle seemed more important than ever. The pain in his leg throbbed, a reminder of his own brush with mortality in Fallujah. He had survived when others hadn't, a matter of inches, of seconds, of pure chance. Project Iron Thunder sought to remove that element of chance, to ensure that no more soldiers died needlessly. Tomorrow would bring the first real test of their concept. But regardless of the outcome, Garrett knew the project had already succeeded in one crucial aspect. It had given him and his team of outcasts a renewed sense of purpose, a mission worthy of their talents and experience. For soldiers like them, that was no small victory. As dawn broke over Fort Hood, Project Iron Thunder faced its moment of truth. The morning air hung heavy with anticipation as Project Iron Thunder prepared for its first true test. Fort Hood's remote testing range stretched before them, a vast expanse of dirt and scrub brush perfect for evaluating a remotely operated tank. Garrett stood in the makeshift command center, a converted shipping container positioned on a ridge overlooking the range. Through the open door, he could see the M60 Patton sitting motionless in the distance, its silhouette imposing against the Texas landscape. Systems check, he ordered, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his gut. Reynolds nodded, fingers dancing across his keyboard. Power systems online, communications link established, video feed active. On the wall-mounted monitors, multiple camera views appeared. External cameras mounted on poles around the range provided a bird's-eye view, while cameras on the tank itself showed perspective from the vehicle. Control interface ready, Harris reported from her station. Her remote control setup resembled a tank interior, with modified controls for steering, acceleration, and turret movement. Months of development had gone into creating a system that would feel intuitive to an experienced tank operator. Sanchez wheeled himself into position beside Harris. I'll talk you through it. Remember, the M60 has different handling characteristics than the simulators you've been using. Garrett activated the radio. Range control, this is Iron Thunder. Request permission to begin mobility test. Iron Thunder, range control. You are cleared for testing. Range is secure. Garrett nodded to Harris. Start the engine. Harris engaged the remote ignition sequence. On the monitors, they watched as the tank's exhaust belched a cloud of dark smoke, then cleared as the massive diesel engine rumbled to life. Engine parameters normal, Wilson reported, monitoring the diagnostic feed. Oil pressure good, temperature rising to operational levels. Engage forward movement, Garrett ordered. 1/4 speed. Harris eased the control stick forward. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a lurch, The 60-ton behemoth began to move, its tracks biting into the earth as it crept forward. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the team. After months of theoretical work, of rebuilding and modifications, of overcoming skepticism and bureaucratic hurdles, Iron Thunder was moving under remote control. Increase to half speed, Garrett directed, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the surge of satisfaction. Begin basic maneuver test. For the next hour, Harris put the tank through a series of increasingly complex movements, starting with simple turns, graduating to figure eights, and finally navigating an impromptu obstacle course created from concrete barriers. The M60 responded admirably, its movements becoming smoother as Harris adjusted to the control interface. Let's test the turret controls, Garrett suggested. Harris engaged the turret system, rotating the massive gun barrel through its full range of motion. The movement was slower than with a human crew, but precise. Gun elevation functioning within parameters, Sanchez confirmed. Reynolds monitored the communications link. Signal strength holding steady at 85%. No latency issues. The test proceeded flawlessly until they attempted a high-speed reverse maneuver. As the tank accelerated backward, a loud mechanical screech echoed across the range, audible even in the command center. On the monitors, they watched as the right tread locked, causing the tank to pivot uncontrollably. "Cut power," Wilson shouted. Harris disengaged the drive system immediately, but momentum carried the tank several more meters before it shuddered to a halt, listing slightly to one side. "What happened?" Garrett demanded. Wilson studied the diagnostic readouts, frowning. Transmission failure in the right final drive. Probably metal fatigue in one of the rebuilt components. "Can we continue testing?" "Negative. We need to tow her back to the bay and tear down the entire drive assembly." Despite the setback, Garrett considered the test largely successful. The remote control concept had been proven viable. The failure was in the tank's original systems, not in their modifications. "Good work, everyone," he said as they prepared to recover the disabled vehicle. The control interface performed beyond expectations. "Harris, your precision with the remote systems was impressive." Harris allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you, sir. With some refinements to the feedback mechanisms, I believe we can achieve near-human response times." "Reynolds, any concerns about the communications link?" The young specialist shook his head. "It's solid for this range. We'll need more powerful transmitters for operational distances, but the encryption protocol is holding up." As the team packed up their equipment, Garrett noticed a vehicle approaching along the access road. His eyes narrowed as he recognized Colonel Blackwood's staff car. "Unexpected company," he muttered to Wilson. The older man followed his gaze. "Want me to accidentally spill coffee on his uniform?" "Tempting, but no. Let's see what he wants." Blackwood emerged from the vehicle with a single aide, surveying the scene with calculating eyes. His gaze lingered on the disabled tank being attached to a recovery vehicle. "Colonel Garrett," he called, approaching with a practiced smile. "I heard you were conducting tests today. Thought I'd observe firsthand." "You missed most of it," Garrett replied neutrally. "We're just wrapping up." "Mechanical failure?" Blackwood nodded toward the M60. "Transmission issue. Nothing to do with the remote systems, which performed excellently." "Impressive." Blackwood's tone suggested otherwise. "Of course, using vintage equipment comes with inherent risks. Our ARCP vehicles are built from the ground up with reliability in mind." Garrett bit back a retort. "Was there something specific you needed, Colonel?" "Actually, yes. I've been asked to evaluate all robotics programs for potential collaboration. Budget constraints, you understand?" Blackwood's smile tightened. "The DoD is questioning whether we need multiple unmanned vehicle initiatives." The implication was clear. Blackwood was positioning to absorb or eliminate Project Iron Thunder. "We have different objectives," Garrett pointed out. "Your program is developing purpose-built combat vehicles. We're converting existing platforms for unmanned operation. Complementary, not competitive." "Perhaps, but resources are finite." Blackwood gestured toward the command center. "May I see your control systems?" "For my evaluation." Garrett hesitated, torn between military courtesy and protecting his team's innovations. "Sir," Reynolds interrupted quietly, "the systems are still being secured. Protocol requires all testing data be downloaded and stored before external observation." Garrett seized the excuse. "Sorry, Colonel, security protocols. But I'd be happy to schedule a formal demonstration once we've addressed the mechanical issues." Blackwood's expression hardened momentarily, then relaxed into practiced affability. "Of course. Protocol is important. I'll have my office coordinate with yours." He handed Garrett a folder. In the meantime, I'm required to share this information with all robotics project leaders. Inside the folder was a memorandum from the Pentagon announcing a 30% reduction in research and development funding for the upcoming fiscal year. Projects would be evaluated for continuation based on progress, strategic importance, and cost effectiveness. Challenging times ahead, Blackwood observed with false sympathy. My team is already preparing our justification package. I hope yours is as well. After Blackwood departed, the team gathered in the command center. The mood considerably darkened. 30% cuts? Wilson scowled. That's no coincidence, Blackwood's maneuvering. Can he really shut us down? Reynolds asked anxiously. Garrett studied the memorandum carefully. Not directly, but if we can't demonstrate significant progress by the next review cycle, we'll be vulnerable. How long do we have? Harris inquired. 90 days until preliminary evaluations. 6 months until final decisions. Sanchez wheeled himself closer to the group. We can beat this. The transmission issue is fixable. We already have proof of concept for remote operation. It's not enough, Garrett said, thinking aloud. Plenty of projects demonstrate basic feasibility. We need to show revolutionary potential, something that justifies continued investment. Wilson stroked his chin thoughtfully. What if we added a mine-clearing package, combat engineering capability without risking human operators? Good thinking, Garrett nodded. Harris, how difficult would it be to add manipulator arms for handling explosive ordnance? Challenging but doable. We'd need additional servo motors and more sophisticated control algorithms. Reynolds, can our current communication system handle the increased complexity? The young specialist considered for a moment. We'd need to expand bandwidth, but the basic architecture is sound. Then that's our next development phase, Garrett decided. We've proven remote mobility. Now we demonstrate practical military application. As the team dispersed to begin the recovery operation, Garrett remained in the command center, studying the test data. Despite the mechanical failure, the results were encouraging. The remote control systems had performed beyond expectations, responding with precision to Harris's commands. More importantly, they'd proven the core concept. A full-size tank could indeed be operated remotely with sufficient fidelity to execute complex maneuvers. With refinements, the system could potentially match or exceed the capabilities of a human crew without risking lives. Garrett's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was General Howard. I heard about your test, the general began without preamble, and about Blackwood showing up uninvited. News travels fast. It's my business to know what happens on my base, Howard replied. What's your assessment? The concept is sound. We experienced a mechanical failure in the original tank systems, not in our modifications. With proper funding and support, we can deliver a fully functional prototype within the original timeline. Howard was silent for a moment. Blackwood's pushing hard to consolidate all unmanned vehicle programs under his authority. He has supporters at the Pentagon. And you? I support innovation and saving soldiers' lives, Howard said carefully. But I also answer to the chain of command. If the DoD decides to consolidate, then Iron Thunder gets absorbed by ARCP and Blackwood buries it, Garrett finished. He's not interested in retrofitting existing vehicles. Too cost-effective. Not enough profit for his defense contractor friends. That's a serious allegation, Bill. But not an inaccurate one. Garrett paused, considering his next words carefully. Sir, we both know what's at stake here. Not just the project, but the principle. Do we develop technology that maximizes protection of our troops? Or do we prioritize systems that maximize profits for defense contractors? Howard sighed audibly. You always were a stubborn idealist, Bill. It's why you never made general. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't entirely intended as one. Howard's tone softened slightly. Look, I can shield you from the worst of the politics for now, but you need results, and quickly. Something concrete that justifies continued independent development. We're already pivoting to demonstrate mine-clearing capabilities, practical application in a high-risk scenario. Good. That plays well with current operational concerns. Howard paused. I'll do what I can, Bill, but be prepared for tough scrutiny. The line went dead, leaving Garrett with mixed emotions. Howard hadn't committed to protecting the project indefinitely, but he'd bought them time. Now they needed to make the most of it. Back at the maintenance bay, the team worked tirelessly to repair the transmission damage. Wilson and Sanchez supervised the removal of the entire drive assembly, identifying the failed components. Metal fatigue in the final drive gear, Wilson confirmed, examining the damaged part. Probably stress fractures from years of sitting unused. Can we rebuild it? Garrett asked. Wilson shook his head. Not this one, we need a replacement. Which would normally take months to requisition, Sanchez added grimly. Garrett considered their options. What about the other target tanks? Could we salvage parts? Possibly, Wilson acknowledged, but we'd need authorization. Those vehicles are still technically in service. Leave that to me, Garrett said, already formulating a plan. The next morning, Garrett met with the commander of the target tank program, Lieutenant Colonel Parker, a reasonable man who had been supportive of Project Iron Thunder from the beginning. You want to cannibalize one of my tanks? Parker asked, raising an eyebrow. Temporarily, Garrett clarified. We need the transmission assembly to continue our testing. Once our project proves successful, all target tanks will be converted to remote operation anyway. Parker considered this. And in the meantime, I'm short one training vehicle. We can provide a loaner from the motor pool. A Bradley fighting vehicle would make a suitable target for gunnery training. Different silhouette, Parker pointed out. But safer for your drivers, Garrett countered. No risk of accidents like the one that killed Master Sergeant Miller. The mention of Miller shifted the atmosphere. Parker had known the sergeant, had attended his funeral. One vehicle, he conceded finally, and I expect priority consideration for remote conversion once your project is approved. Agreed. Thank you, Colonel. With the parts acquisition resolved, Garrett returned to the maintenance bay to find his team gathered around Reynolds' workstation, expressions grim. What's happening? He asked, immediately alert to the tension. Harris looked up, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. Someone tried to breach our secure server last night, targeting our design files and test data. How bad? They didn't get in, Reynolds assured him. Our encryption held, but it was a sophisticated attempt, not some random hacker. Blackwood, Wilson growled. We can't prove that, Garrett cautioned, though privately he harbored the same suspicion. Whoever it was knows what they're doing, Reynolds continued. The attack specifically targeted the proprietary algorithms Harris developed for the control interface. Can you trace it? Reynolds shook his head. The attack was routed through multiple servers, practically impossible to identify the source. Garrett processed this new threat. Improve our security, additional firewalls, encrypted backups stored offline. We can't afford to lose our intellectual property. Already on it, Reynolds confirmed. I'm implementing military-grade protocols on all our systems. As the days passed, Project Iron Thunder regained momentum. The transmission was replaced, security enhanced, and development of the mine-clearing attachment began in earnest. Garrett coordinated with Army engineers to understand the specific requirements for remote mine clearance operations. The key challenge is precision, explained Captain Lewis, an explosive ordnance disposal specialist consulting on the project. When dealing with IEDs or anti-personnel mines, even small movements can trigger detonation. Garrett nodded, understanding the implications. So our control system needs even greater sensitivity than for basic maneuvers. Exactly. And ideally, you'd want manipulator arms with haptic feedback so the operator can feel what they're touching. Harris, who had been listening intently, spoke up. We could adapt technology from surgical robotics. Those systems already provide precise control and tactile feedback at a distance. Can we acquire that technology within our budget constraints? Garrett asked. Not commercially, Harris admitted, but I have contacts at the Army Medical Research Command who might be willing to share developmental systems for military applications. Make the call, Garrett authorized. This could be the breakthrough we need. While Harris pursued the medical robotics angle, Sanchez and Wilson focused on modifying the tank to accommodate the new attachments. The turret would need to be reconfigured, with the main gun replaced by a specialized boom arm capable of deploying various mine-clearing tools. We're essentially converting it from a main battle tank to an armored engineering vehicle, Sanchez explained as they reviewed the design modifications. Similar in concept to the M728 combat engineer vehicle, but remotely operated, which addresses the primary vulnerability of combat engineering, Garrett noted. The human operator. Wilson nodded grimly. I served with a CEV platoon during Desert Storm, watched one hit a mine while breaching Iraqi defenses. Driver didn't make it. The memory hung heavy in the air, reinforcing their sense of purpose. This wasn't just about winning a bureaucratic battle with Blackwood. It was about preventing tragedies like the one Wilson had witnessed. 3 weeks after the initial test, Project Iron Thunder faced a critical review. General Howard arrived with a delegation from the Pentagon, including representatives from the Army's Research and Development Command. Blackwood was notably present, standing at the back of the group with barely concealed anticipation. The maintenance bay had been transformed for the presentation. The M60 sat prominently in the center, its new configuration drawing immediate attention. The main turret had been modified, the 105mm gun removed and replaced with a telescoping boom arm equipped with cameras and manipulator claws. The tank's exterior featured additional sensors and communication equipment. Garrett stood before the assembled officials, projecting confidence despite the stakes. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. Project Iron Thunder began with a simple premise: to remove human operators from vehicles designed to be targeted. What we've developed, however, has potential far beyond training applications. He gestured toward the modified tank. This prototype demonstrates how existing armored platforms can be converted for remote operation in high-risk scenarios. Specifically, we've configured this vehicle for mine clearance and IED disposal, operations that traditionally put combat engineers at extreme risk. Harris stepped forward, explaining the control systems with professional precision. Reynolds followed, detailing the secure communications architecture. Sanchez presented the operational concepts, emphasizing how the system could be deployed in current conflict zones. Throughout the presentation, Garrett watched the officials' reactions. Most seemed genuinely interested, asking pertinent questions about capabilities and limitations. Blackwood, however, remained stone-faced, occasionally whispering to an aide. "What's the effective operational range?" asked a colonel from R&D Command. "Currently 2 miles with our prototype transmitter," Reynolds answered. "But the architecture is designed to integrate with tactical satellite communications for global reach." "And the response time?" another official inquired. "Any latency in the controls?" Harris addressed this concern. "Our current system demonstrates latency under 100 milliseconds, comparable to human reaction time. With the fiber optic upgrades we're implementing next week, we expect to reduce that further." As the technical questions continued, General Howard pulled Garrett aside. "They're impressed," Howard murmured. "The mine-clearing adaptation was a smart strategic move, very relevant to current operations." "But," Howard glanced toward Blackwood, "but your friend over there has been lobbying hard. Claims his program can incorporate your innovations while providing purpose-built platforms optimized for remote operation. At 10 times the cost and twice the development time," Garrett countered. "I know that. Make sure they do too." When the technical presentation concluded, Garrett requested authorization for a live demonstration the following week. "We'll show you exactly what Iron Thunder can do in a simulated mine-clearing operation." The delegation approved the demonstration, scheduling it for 7 days later. As the officials departed, Blackwood lingered, approaching Garrett with measured steps. "Impressive pivot," he acknowledged coolly. "Mine clearing, very humanitarian. It's a critical military function that costs lives when performed manually," Garrett replied evenly. "Indeed, though I wonder if a 60-year-old tank design is the optimal platform." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The delegation seems interested, but interest doesn't equal funding, especially with those budget cuts coming. We'll let the demonstration speak for itself." Blackwood stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Be reasonable, Bill. Your concept has merit, but it belongs as part of a comprehensive unmanned vehicle strategy under proper management." "Your management?" "I have the relationships and resources to see this technology fully developed. Working together, we could revolutionize ground warfare." Garrett studied the man before him, recognizing the offer for what it was: absorption of Iron Thunder into Blackwood's program, with all credit and control shifting away from Garrett's team. "I appreciate the offer," Garrett said finally, "but we believe in our approach. Adapting existing platforms is more cost-effective and can be implemented more quickly than developing entirely new vehicles." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Stubbornness isn't a virtue in the modern military, Colonel. It's an obstacle to progress." He turned to leave, then paused. "1 week until your demonstration. A lot can happen in a week." The warning was unmistakable. As Blackwood departed, Wilson approached, scowling. "What did the shark want?" "To swallow us whole," Garrett replied grimly. "He offered to incorporate our technology into his program." "Generous of him," Wilson snorted. "And when you declined?" He made what sounded very much like a threat. Wilson's expression darkened further. "We should increase security, physical and digital." "Agreed, and accelerate preparations for the demonstration. We can't afford any technical issues." The team threw themselves into final preparations with renewed urgency. Harris refined the control interface, incorporating elements of the medical robotics technology she'd acquired. Reynolds strengthened their cybersecurity measures, implementing continuous monitoring of all systems. Wilson and Sanchez worked on the mechanical reliability of both the tank and the mine-clearing attachments. 3 days before the scheduled demonstration, Reynolds requested an urgent meeting with Garrett. The young specialist looked troubled, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. "Sir, I think we have a problem," he began once they were alone in Garrett's office. "What kind of problem?" Reynolds placed a laptop on the desk, screen showing lines of code. "I've been monitoring our systems for intrusion attempts, as ordered. This morning I detected an anomaly in our communication protocols." "Another hack attempt?" "No, sir. The anomaly originated from within our network." Reynolds looked uncomfortable. "Someone on our team exported technical data to an external drive, then transmitted portions of it off base." Garrett felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "You're saying we have a mole?" "The evidence suggests it, yes. Specifically, they accessed the secure server containing our proprietary control algorithms and communication protocols." "Can you identify who?" Reynolds hesitated. "The access occurred during overnight hours when the bay was minimally staffed. Security logs show 4 team members present at various times. Myself, Harris, Wilson, and one of the junior technicians, Specialist Grant." "Why would you be suspected if you're the one reporting this?" "Standard security protocol, sir. Everyone with access is a potential source. I included myself for completeness." Garrett nodded, appreciating the thoroughness. "What was taken specifically?" "The core communication encryption protocols and parts of the control interface design. Essentially the elements that make our systems secure and responsive." "Exactly what Blackwood would need to replicate our success without understanding the underlying engineering," Garrett concluded. "When did this occur?" "Last night between 0200 and 0300. Garrett considered the implications. This wasn't just sabotage. It was theft of intellectual property with military applications. A serious breach. "Keep this between us for now," he instructed. "Continue monitoring, but don't confront anyone. I need to handle this carefully." "Yes, sir." After Reynolds departed, Garrett sat alone, processing the disturbing revelation. Someone on his team, someone he trusted, was feeding information to Blackwood. The betrayal stung personally, but the professional implications were potentially catastrophic. He needed to identify the mole quickly, but without creating a witch hunt that would destroy team cohesion. And he needed evidence that would stand up to military justice scrutiny. Garrett began by quietly reviewing the personnel files of everyone with access to the secure server. Wilson was beyond suspicion in Garrett's mind. They'd served together for decades, and Wilson had nothing to gain by sabotaging the project. Harris had a spotless record and had invested countless hours in developing the control systems. Undermining that work made no logical sense. Reynolds himself seemed unlikely. As a cybersecurity specialist, he could have taken the information without leaving traces, yet he was the one who reported the breach. That left Specialist Grant, a talented engineer recently assigned to the project. Grant had the necessary access and technical skills. But what would be his motivation? Garrett pulled up the young man's service record, looking for connections to Blackwood or quantum defense systems. Nothing obvious appeared, but one detail caught his attention. Grant had applied for a civilian position with a defense contractor 6 months earlier, before being assigned to Project Iron Thunder. The contractor was a subsidiary of Quantum Defense Systems, Blackwood's primary industrial partner. It wasn't definitive proof, but it warranted closer scrutiny. Garrett decided on a 2-pronged approach: surveillance of Grant's activities and a deliberate misinformation operation to confirm his suspicions. He called Reynolds back to his office, outlining the plan. "We'll create a secured folder containing modified technical documents. Convincing, but subtly flawed. If these documents appear in Blackwood's possession, we'll have confirmation." "A canary trap," Reynolds nodded. "What flaws did you have in mind?" "Something that would work in simulation but fail catastrophically in actual implementation. A fatal error in the control feedback loop that would cause system lockup under stress." Reynolds understood immediately. "We could modify the error handling protocols. Make it look like the system can recover from communication interruptions when actually it would freeze the controls." "Exactly. Prepare the modified documents and place them on the secure server tonight. Then we watch who accesses them." The trap was set that evening. Reynolds created the doctored files, placing them in a folder marked Final Demo Protocols Restricted. To avoid arousing suspicion, he also created legitimate backup files in a separate, less obvious location. Garrett arranged for discreet observation of the maintenance bay during overnight hours, positioning security personnel with orders to log all entries and exits without interfering. 2 nights before the scheduled demonstration, their vigilance paid off. Security logs showed Grant entering the maintenance bay at 1:45 hours, ostensibly to perform system diagnostics. Surveillance cameras captured him accessing the secure server and downloading files to an external drive. Garrett was woken by a call from Reynolds at 0330. Sir, the trap was triggered. Grant accessed the modified files 20 minutes ago and copied them. He's currently in his quarters. Any transmission activity? Not yet from the base network. He might be using a personal device or waiting for a better opportunity. Maintain surveillance. I want to catch him in the act of transmission. The opportunity came the following morning. Grant left the base during his authorized break period, driving to a coffee shop in Killeen, the city adjacent to Fort Hood. There, security personnel observed him meeting briefly with a civilian. Though the meeting appeared casual, Grant was seen passing a small object, likely a data storage device, to the other man. Military police intercepted the civilian as he left the coffee shop, identifying him as a consultant for quantum defense systems. The storage device was recovered, containing the modified technical documents from Project Iron Thunder's secure server. Grant was apprehended upon his return to base, bringing him directly to Garrett's office under armed escort. The young specialist looked terrified as he faced Garrett, his earlier confidence evaporated. "Do you know why you're here, specialist?" Garrett asked, his voice carefully controlled. Grant swallowed visibly. "I can explain, sir. I sincerely hope you can. Unauthorized access to classified military technology. Transmission of restricted technical data to unauthorized personnel. These are serious offenses, specialist. Treason, potentially." The word hung in the air between them. Grant's face drained of color. I didn't think of it that way," he stammered. "I was just providing consultation. Technical advice. To a defense contractor working with Colonel Blackwood's program, while assigned to a competing military project." Garrett leaned forward. "Who approached you, Blackwood himself or someone from Quantum?" Grant hesitated, then seemed to deflate. "A Quantum representative. At first, they just asked general questions about tank systems. Nothing classified. Then they offered consulting fees for more specific information. It started small. Until you were stealing proprietary military technology." Garrett's tone was ice cold. "Why?" "Money," Grant admitted, ashamed. "My father's in a care facility. Alzheimer's. The Army benefits don't cover it. The extra income meant I could keep him in private care instead of a VA facility." Garrett studied the young man, seeing not a hardened spy but a desperate soldier who had made a catastrophic error in judgment. "What did Blackwood want specifically?" "Your control systems. He has the hardware for remote operation but can't get the response time and reliability you've achieved. They've been stuck at 300 millisecond latency, unusable in combat conditions." "And they offered what in return?" $50,000 and a guaranteed position at Quantum after my service ends." Garrett allowed a heavy silence to fill the room, letting Grant contemplate the consequences of his actions. "You have two options, specialist," he finally said. "Option 1, I refer this to military justice for prosecution. With the evidence we have, you're looking at dishonorable discharge and significant prison time." Grant paled further. "And option 2, you become a double agent. Feed Blackwood exactly what we want him to receive. Help us expose his methods. You'd trust me after this?" "Trust? No, but I'd use you. And in exchange, I'll recommend leniency when this is over." Garrett let that sink in. "Your father will still need care whether you're in prison or not." Grant didn't hesitate long. "What would you want me to do?" "Continue providing information to Blackwood, but only what we authorize. The modified files you already transmitted contain a fatal flaw that won't be apparent until implementation. We want to see if he attempts to use them without proper testing. And if he discovers the flaw, then we'll know he has competent engineers examining the data. Either way, we gain intelligence about his operation." Garrett's expression hardened. "But understand this, one deviation from our instructions, one unauthorized communication, and option 1 comes back into effect immediately." "I understand, sir. I'll do whatever you ask." After Grant was escorted out, Wilson entered the office, having observed the interrogation from an adjoining room. "Think he'll play it straight?" the older man asked skeptically. "He doesn't have much choice, and fear is a powerful motivator." Garrett rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache building. "More importantly, we now know exactly what Blackwood is after and what he's lacking." "The control latency issue," Wilson nodded. "That's been his program's Achilles heel from the beginning. Purpose-built vehicles with all the latest technology, but response times too slow for combat application. While we've solved that problem using modified commercial technology, and Harris's algorithms, Garrett concluded. No wonder he's desperate to acquire our work. What now? Do we postpone the demonstration? Blackwood might try something more direct. Garrett considered this, weighing the risks against the imperative to show progress. No, we proceed as planned, but we increase security and prepare contingencies for any potential sabotage. And Grant? We use him. Have Reynolds work with him to prepare a new set of technical documents, convincing but fundamentally flawed in ways that won't be immediately apparent. Let Blackwood think he's still getting valuable intelligence. The day before the demonstration, the team worked with focused intensity, running multiple system checks and rehearsing the operation sequence. The modified M60 had been transported to a special testing range where the Army Corps of Engineers had prepared a simulated minefield using inert explosives with electronic sensors to register successful neutralization. Garrett supervised the preparations personally, examining every aspect of the operation for vulnerabilities. Harris and Reynolds conducted final calibrations on the control systems, while Wilson and Sanchez inspected the mechanical components of the mine-clearing attachments. As evening approached, Garrett gathered the team for a final briefing, pointedly excluding Grant, who had been assigned peripheral duties under close supervision. Tomorrow is more than a technology demonstration, he told them. It's a proof of concept that could change the future of combat engineering and save countless lives. Every person in this room has contributed expertise that the conventional defense establishment overlooked or undervalued. He looked at each team member in turn. Major Harris, your control interface innovations have achieved response times that Blackwood's team can't match with 10 times our budget. Specialist Reynolds, your communications security architecture is setting new standards for remote operations. Sergeant Sanchez, your insights into practical tank operations have made this system intuitive for operators. And Chief Wilson, your mechanical ingenuity has given new life to a platform others dismissed as obsolete. The team straightened under his recognition, professional pride evident in their expressions. Tomorrow we show the Pentagon what can be accomplished when you focus on the mission rather than the politics. When you value innovation over bureaucracy. Garrett's voice hardened slightly. Blackwood will be watching for any mistake, any vulnerability. We don't give him that satisfaction. As the team dispersed to their quarters for a few hours of rest, Garrett remained at the testing range, walking the perimeter alone. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the Texas sky. In the distance, the M60 sat silently, its modified profile distinct against the horizon. He reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the burning streets of Fallujah to a remote testing range at Fort Hood, from combat commander to project leader. The path hadn't been one he would have chosen, but he'd found purpose in it nonetheless. His leg ached as he walked, the old wounds never quite healing completely. The pain was a constant reminder of his own vulnerability, of the human cost of warfare. Project Iron Thunder represented a chance to reduce that cost for future generations of soldiers. Garrett's phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from Sarah Miller, sent to wish the team luck with the demonstration. Attached was a photo of young David in his JROTC uniform, proudly standing at attention. The message read simply, "James would be proud of what you're doing." The words struck Garrett deeply. Beyond the politics, beyond the competition with Blackwood, this was why Iron Thunder mattered. For the James Millers who never made it home, and for the Davids who still might. He composed a brief reply thanking Sarah and promising to call after the demonstration, then turned back toward the command center. Tomorrow would determine whether their vision became reality or was absorbed into Blackwood's corporate-driven program. Either way, Garrett was determined to show what his team of outcasts had accomplished. They had created something revolutionary on a shoestring budget, proving that innovation didn't require massive defense contracts or political connections. Just the right people with the right motivation. As he entered the command center, he noticed Wilson still working, modifying components at his workbench despite the late hour. "You should get some rest, Doc," Garrett advised. Wilson looked up, his weathered face showing fatigue but determination. "Too old to sleep before a mission, you know how it is." Garrett nodded, understanding completely. For men like them, the pre-mission vigil was a ritual, a time for preparation, both practical and psychological. "Any concerns about tomorrow?" he asked. Wilson set down his tools. "Technically, we're ready. The systems are solid, but Blackwood won't take this lying down. He's got too much at stake. You think he'll try something during the demonstration? If I were a betting man, I'd put money on it." Wilson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The question is, what form will it take? Technical sabotage? Administrative obstruction? Or something more direct? We've taken precautions against technical interference, Garrett noted. Redundant systems, isolated communications channels. Reynolds has been monitoring for cyber intrusions constantly. And Grant, under surveillance. His access has been restricted to non-critical systems. Wilson nodded approvingly. You've covered the obvious angles. But Blackwood's crafty. He might have contingencies we haven't anticipated. Then we adapt and overcome, Garrett said simply. Like always. The older man grinned suddenly. Damn right we do. Remember that time outside Basra when our communications went down? Entire battalion blind, and you navigated us through Republican Guard territory using nothing but a paper map and your wristwatch. Different times, Garrett acknowledged, the memory vivid, more straightforward in some ways. The enemy was clearly defined. And now the enemy wears the same uniform, Wilson observed, uses the same language of duty and service, but serves different masters. Not everyone. No, Wilson agreed. Not everyone. He gestured around the command center, at the equipment and plans representing months of dedicated work. This team you've assembled, they're the real deal. They're in it for the right reasons. Including you, Garrett noted. You could have retired months ago, been fishing in Florida instead of rebuilding ancient transmissions in Texas. Wilson snorted. Fishing's boring. This, he waved at the project around them, this still matters, makes a difference. He paused, growing more serious. After all these years, that's what keeps me going. Knowing the work matters. Garrett understood completely. For men like them, purpose was essential. Without it, retirement was just a slow death. Get some sleep, Doc, he said again. Tomorrow's a big day. You too, Bill. That leg won't thank you for standing on it all night. As Wilson packed up his tools, Garrett made a final circuit of the command center, checking each station. Everything was in readiness. Now they just needed to execute flawlessly, regardless of what Blackwood might attempt. Tomorrow would determine the fate of Project Iron Thunder. But more importantly, it would demonstrate whether innovative, cost-effective solutions could still triumph over entrenched bureaucracy and corporate influence. For Garrett and his team of outcasts, it was a battle worth fighting, regardless of the odds. The night passed slowly for Garrett. Sleep came in fitful bursts, his mind continually cycling through potential scenarios for the demonstration, identifying vulnerabilities, planning contingencies. By dawn, he was already dressed and at the command center, reviewing the operational sequence one final time. The team arrived shortly after, each member focused and ready. Harris conducted final calibrations on the control interface, her movements precise and methodical. Reynolds verified the communication systems, ensuring all channels were secure. Sanchez positioned himself at the operational advisor station, ready to provide expertise on tank maneuvers in the challenging terrain. Wilson was the last to arrive, carrying a thermos of coffee and a grim expression. Blackwood's already here, he reported. Arrived with the Pentagon delegation 20 minutes early. Let him wait, Garrett replied calmly. We stick to our timeline. At precisely 0900 hours, the official demonstration began. General Howard led the delegation into the command center, where Garrett greeted them with professional courtesy. Blackwood stood near the back, his expression neutral, but his eyes constantly scanning, assessing. Gentlemen, welcome to the Project Iron Thunder demonstration, Garrett began. Today you'll witness the culmination of 18 months of development, a fully remote-operated armored vehicle performing high-risk mine clearance operations without exposing human operators to danger. He gestured toward the wall-mounted screens showing multiple views of the testing range. The modified M60 sat at the starting position, its mine-clearing boom folded in transport configuration. Major Harris will be the primary operator today, controlling the vehicle from this station. Sergeant Sanchez is providing tactical guidance, while Chief Wilson monitors mechanical systems and Specialist Reynolds ensures communications integrity. Howard nodded approvingly. Proceed when ready, Colonel. Harris took her position at the control station, her hands resting lightly on the custom interface. With practiced movements, she initiated the startup sequence. On the screens, they watched as the M60's engine roared to life, a plume of exhaust visible in the morning air. Vehicle online, Harris reported. All systems nominal. Begin approach to the minefield, Garrett directed. Harris engaged the drive system, and the tank began to move with surprising grace for such a massive vehicle. Its tracks churned the earth as it advanced toward the simulated minefield marked with red flags. Approaching objective, Harris announced, deploying mine-clearing attachment. With precise control inputs, she extended the telescoping boom from the modified turret. Cameras mounted on the boom provided detailed views of the ground ahead, identifying the inert mines planted by the engineers. First target identified, Sanchez confirmed. Proceed with neutralization sequence. For the next 30 minutes, the demonstration unfolded flawlessly. The remote-controlled tank methodically cleared a path through the minefield, its manipulator arms delicately exposing and neutralizing each explosive device. The precision was remarkable, exceeding even Garrett's expectations. The delegation watched with evident interest, particularly the representatives from the Corps of Engineers, who exchanged impressed glances as the tank handled increasingly complex mine configurations. Even Blackwood seemed unable to find fault with the technical performance, though his expression remained carefully neutral. As the tank approached the final section of the minefield, Harris prepared for the most challenging aspect of the demonstration, neutralizing a simulated IED concealed within a culvert, requiring precise manipulation in a confined space. Approaching final objective, she reported, adjusting boom angle for culvert access. Suddenly, Reynolds straightened at his monitoring station. "Sir, I'm detecting an anomalous signal on a parallel frequency." Garrett tensed. "Source?" "Unknown, but it's attempting to interface with our control channels." This was it, the interference they had anticipated. Blackwood's expression remained impassive, but Garrett caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Activate countermeasures," Garrett ordered calmly, not wanting to alarm the delegation. Reynolds worked rapidly. Isolation protocols engaged, switching to backup communication channels. For a heart-stopping moment, the tank froze in position, its systems temporarily disrupted. Then Harris regained control, smoothly transitioning to the secondary systems they had prepared for exactly this contingency. "I have positive control," she confirmed, proceeding with final objective. The tank resumed its operation, completing the mine-clearing demonstration without further incident. As Harris powered down the systems, the delegation broke into spontaneous applause. "Impressive recovery," Howard commented to Garrett, "almost as if you were expecting interference." "We prepare for contingencies," Garrett replied simply. The Corps of Engineers representative stepped forward. "The precision of the manipulation is remarkable. Current manual techniques can't match this level of control, and they put our soldiers at extreme risk." Another official nodded agreement. "Response time appears negligible. How are you achieving that with remote operation?" Harris explained the proprietary control algorithms and feedback mechanisms they had developed, emphasizing how the system processed operator inputs to eliminate perceptible lag. Throughout the technical discussion, Garrett watched Blackwood. The colonel maintained his composure, but the slight flush on his neck betrayed his frustration. The attempted sabotage had failed, and Project Iron Thunder had demonstrated capabilities beyond what his own program had achieved. As the delegation prepared to depart, General Howard pulled Garrett aside. "The deputy secretary was impressed," he said quietly, "particularly by the cost-effectiveness. Converting existing platforms rather than building from scratch resonates with the current budget constraints." "And Blackwood?" Howard's expression hardened. "The signal interference has been noted. Difficult to prove, but it raises questions about competitive practices. I wouldn't worry about him for now." So Iron Thunder continues. "With expanded funding," Howard confirmed, "the Deputy Secretary wants a formal proposal for converting the entire target tank fleet with potential applications for actual combat operations." Relief washed through Garrett, though he maintained his professional demeanor. "We'll prepare the proposal immediately." "Good. And Bill," Howard added, his tone softening slightly, "well done. You've proven that innovation doesn't always require massive defense contracts." As the delegation departed, the team gathered in the command center, tension giving way to cautious celebration. "We did it," Reynolds said, grinning broadly, "even with the interference attempt." Harris allowed herself a small smile. The secondary systems performed perfectly. The transition was seamless. "What happens with Grant?" Wilson asked quietly. "Military justice will handle him," Garrett replied. "I've recommended leniency given his cooperation after discovery, but actions have consequences." Sanchez wheeled himself closer. "And Blackwood? He's neutralized for now, but not eliminated. Men like him are resilient." Garrett surveyed his team with pride. "But so are we. Project Iron Thunder continues with full funding and expanded scope." The announcement brought cheers from the team. As they celebrated their victory, Garrett stepped outside for a moment of private reflection. The Texas sun was high now, beating down on the testing range where the M60 still sat, its mission completed successfully. He thought about the journey that had brought them to this point, from a concept born of tragedy to a proven technology with potential to save countless lives. The pain in his legs seemed less significant now. The weight of his promise to Master Sergeant Miller somewhat lightened. Wilson joined him outside, offering a cup of coffee. Thinking deep thoughts? Wondering what comes next, Garrett admitted. We've proven the concept works. Now we need to scale it up, implement it across the force. One step at a time, Wilson advised. Today we celebrate. Tomorrow we start changing the way the Army fights. Garrett nodded, raising his cup in a small toast. To Iron Thunder. To Iron Thunder, Wilson echoed. And to the ones who won't have to die because of what we built here. As they stood watching the tank, a symbol of both warfare's past and its potential future, Garrett felt a sense of accomplishment deeper than any he had experienced in his long military career. This wasn't about winning battles or defeating enemies. It was about protecting those who fought them. In the end, that was the victory that mattered most. The future of Project Iron Thunder stretched before them, filled with challenges yet to overcome and innovations yet to develop. But they had crossed the most difficult threshold, proving that their approach was viable, their vision attainable. The rest was implementation, and Garrett had complete faith in his team's ability to deliver. As the sun reached its zenith over Fort Hood, casting harsh light and sharp shadows across the testing range, Garrett made a silent promise to continue the work they had begun, not for recognition or advancement, but for the soldiers whose lives might be spared by the technology they had pioneered. In a career spanning decades of service, it might prove to be his most enduring contribution to the Army he had served for so long. Behind him, the command center hummed with activity as the team began planning the next phase of development. The work would continue, the mission would expand, but the purpose remained constant, protecting those who served. For an old soldier like Garrett, there could be no worthier cause, no more fitting final chapter to a lifetime of service. 2 weeks after the successful demonstration, Project Iron Thunder occupied new quarters at Fort Hood. The cavernous maintenance bay had been upgraded with additional equipment, workstations, and security systems befitting the project's expanded scope and budget. Garrett surveyed the space with quiet satisfaction, watching his team work with renewed purpose. The Pentagon's endorsement had transformed Iron Thunder from a struggling proof of concept to a priority defense initiative. Their budget had tripled, allowing for accelerated development and the acquisition of 2 additional tanks for conversion. More importantly, they had been authorized to begin developing training protocols for remote operators, signaling the Army's serious commitment to deploying the technology. Quite a change from our humble beginnings, Wilson observed, joining Garrett on the observation platform overlooking the work area. Different circumstances, Garrett agreed, but the same mission. Below them, Major Harris directed a team of technicians installing an enhanced control station. The original prototype had been replaced by a sophisticated system that more closely replicated the sensory experience of being inside a tank. Sanchez was working with the designers, ensuring the interface remained intuitive for experienced tank operators. How's the new transmission holding up? Garrett asked. Rock solid, Wilson reported. The replacement parts from Aberdeen are military grade, not the refurbished components we started with. Makes a difference when you're pushing 60 tons of steel around. Garrett nodded, then lowered his voice. Any word on Blackwood? Wilson's expression darkened. Rumor has it he's been reassigned to the Pentagon, special advisor to the Robotics Integration Office. Kicked upstairs, Garrett translated, out of direct competition with us, but positioned to influence policy. Never underestimate a wounded shark. They're at their most dangerous. Garrett understood the warning. Blackwood had been outmaneuvered but not defeated. From his new position, he could potentially shape the broader implementation of unmanned vehicle technology, including how Iron Thunder would be integrated into the Army's force structure. We focus on delivering results, Garrett said firmly. Politics takes care of itself when the technology proves its worth. Their conversation was interrupted by Reynolds, who approached with a tablet displaying a secure message. Sir, General Howard requests your presence at Division Headquarters. Apparently, there's a VIP visitor interested in Iron Thunder. 30 minutes later, Garrett found himself in Howard's office, surprised to find not only the general, but also a civilian in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Thomas Ryder, Deputy Secretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Colonel Garrett, Ryder began after pleasantries were exchanged, your project has attracted significant attention at the Pentagon. Remote operation of armored vehicles addresses a critical vulnerability in modern warfare. That was our intention, sir, Garrett replied cautiously, wondering about the true purpose of this high-level visit. I've reviewed the technical specifications and performance data, Ryder continued. Impressive results, particularly considering your limited resources and time frame. We have an exceptional team, Ryder nodded. Indeed, which brings me to the purpose of my visit. He placed a folder on the desk. The Department of Defense is accelerating unmanned vehicle development across all services. Project Iron Thunder is being designated as the Army's primary initiative in this space. Howard looked pleased. Congratulations, Bill. This is a significant vote of confidence. But Garrett sensed something unspoken beneath the praise. In the ARCP program, Colonel Blackwood's project, Ryder's expression remained neutral, being refocused on smaller unmanned platforms. Colonel Blackwood's expertise is valuable, but the Pentagon has determined that retrofitting existing armor is more cost-effective than developing entirely new vehicles. I'm glad the Pentagon agrees with our approach, Garrett said carefully. There is, however, one additional matter, Ryder added, his tone shifting subtly. Given the expanded scope and strategic importance, we'll be integrating some additional personnel into your team, technical specialists from various defense agencies and contractors. And there it was, the other shoe dropping. Including quantum defense systems? Garrett asked directly. Ryder didn't flinch. Among others, their expertise in advanced control systems will complement your team's innovations. Garrett understood the political reality at work. Quantum had too much influence in Washington to be completely excluded. This was the compromise. Iron Thunder would continue with Garrett in command, but Blackwood's industrial partners would get a piece of the program. I assume I'll retain operational authority over the project, Garrett verified. Absolutely, Howard interjected. Your leadership is not in question, Bill. This is about scaling up for full implementation. Ryder reinforced the point. Colonel, the Pentagon recognizes that Project Iron Thunder succeeded largely because of your leadership approach. We want to expand the program, not change its fundamental character. Garrett considered his options. Refusing the integration would appear petty and might jeopardize the project's newfound support. Accepting it meant keeping Blackwood's allies close, potentially too close. I'll need final approval on all personnel assignments, he said finally, and clear delineation of roles and responsibilities. Of course, Ryder agreed readily. We want this transition to be smooth and productive. After the meeting concluded and Ryder departed, Howard held Garrett back. This is a win, Bill. Don't lose sight of that. A qualified win, Garrett corrected, with complications. Howard sighed. Welcome to success at the Pentagon level. It's never pure or simple. Blackwood will have eyes and ears in our operation. Probably, Howard acknowledged, but you'll have eyes on them too. Consider it an opportunity to demonstrate that your approach is superior right in front of the competition. Garrett nodded slowly. When do the new personnel arrive? Next week. 3 specialists initially, possibly more as the project expands. I'll prepare the team. As Garrett drove back to the project facility, his mind worked through the implications. The expanded scope and resources were valuable, but the introduction of outside personnel, especially those connected to quantum, and by extension Blackwood, created new challenges. The project was entering a different phase, transitioning from development to implementation, with all the bureaucratic complexity that entailed. He had built Iron Thunder with a small, tightly knit team of overlooked talents. Now they would need to adapt to a larger, more diverse organization while maintaining their innovative edge. It would test his leadership in ways combat never had. The team took the news of the expansion with mixed reactions. Harris expressed concern about preserving their technical approach, while Wilson was overtly suspicious of the incoming quantum personnel. Reynolds worried about security implications, and Sanchez alone seemed philosophical about the changes. Large-scale implementation was always the goal, the sergeant pointed out from his wheelchair. We can't change the Army if we remain a small, isolated project. Garrett appreciated Sanchez's perspective. You're right. This is the next phase of the mission, not the end of it. Over the next several days, Garrett prepared for the integration, reviewing the files of the incoming specialists and reorganizing the project structure to maintain clear chains of authority. He placed Harris in charge of control system development, Wilson overseeing mechanical modifications, and Reynolds responsible for communication security, all areas where their expertise was undeniable and their authority would be difficult to challenge. The day before the new personnel were scheduled to arrive, Garrett received an unexpected phone call from Sarah Miller. Colonel, I hope I'm not interrupting, she began, her voice carrying a note of excitement. David and I just heard the news about Iron Thunder's expansion. It's all over the military community at Fort Hood. Word travels fast, Garrett observed. How are you and David doing? Managing. David's excelling in JROTC. His instructors say he has natural leadership abilities. Like his father, Garrett noted warmly. Yes. Sarah paused. Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. David's school is doing a project on military innovation, and he was hoping to interview you about Iron Thunder. If that's possible with security considerations. Garrett considered the request. While much of the project remained classified, the general concept had been approved for public discussion. More importantly, this was James Miller's son, the boy whose father's death had catalyzed the entire initiative. I'd be honored, he told her. Would Saturday morning work? I could give him a tour of the non-restricted areas of the facility. Sarah's gratitude was evident. That would mean the world to him, Colonel. Thank you. After they arranged the details, Garrett sat at his desk, reflecting on the connection between Project Iron Thunder and the Miller family. What had begun as a promise to a fallen soldier had evolved into something much larger. Yet that personal connection remained at the heart of the mission. The following day, the new personnel arrived. Dr. Elena Kovac from DARPA was a robotics specialist with an impressive publication record. Major Thomas Chen was a systems integration expert from the Army Research Laboratory. And as expected, Marcus Webb represented quantum defense systems, his expertise listed as advanced control interfaces. Garrett greeted them professionally, conducting introductions with his core team before providing an overview of Project Iron Thunder's current status and objectives. Throughout the briefing, he observed the dynamics carefully. Kovac asked insightful technical questions, while Chen focused on implementation timelines. Webb said little but watched everything with careful attention, particularly Harris's explanations of the control system architecture. After the formal briefing, Garrett assigned each new arrival to work with the appropriate team lead. Kovac with Sanchez on operational concepts, Chen with Wilson on vehicle modifications, and Webb with Harris on control systems. The last pairing was deliberate. Harris was best positioned to protect their proprietary technology from potential corporate appropriation. Keep an eye on Webb, Garrett instructed Harris privately. He's here to learn our methods for quantum's benefit. Harris nodded, her expression determined. He'll learn only what we choose to share, sir. The integration period proved less disruptive than Garrett had feared. Kovac and Chen brought valuable expertise and fresh perspectives that enhanced the project. Webb remained an enigma, professional but reserved, contributing technical suggestions while carefully observing the team's methodologies. 1 month into the expanded operation, the team prepared for a major milestone, the first deployment of Iron Thunder in a full-scale combat exercise. 2 M60 tanks had been fully converted for remote operation, with a third undergoing final modifications. The exercise would pit the remotely operated vehicles against conventional forces in a realistic battlefield scenario. The stakes were high. Success would cement Iron Thunder's place in the Army's future force structure. Failure would provide ammunition to skeptics who questioned whether remote operation could match the effectiveness of crude tanks in complex combat situations. The evening before the exercise, Garrett found Webb working late in the control systems lab, reviewing technical specifications without Harris present. Mr. Webb, Garrett acknowledged, deliberately surprising the man. Burning the midnight oil? Webb straightened, his expression momentarily unguarded before recovering his composure. Colonel Garrett, just familiarizing myself with the exercise parameters. Garrett glanced at the screen, noting that Webb had been accessing files beyond the exercise briefing. Looks like you're reviewing our proprietary algorithms as well. Webb didn't flinch. Understanding the system thoroughly helps me provide useful input. Of course. Garrett maintained a neutral tone, though I'm curious why you're doing so after hours without Major Harris present. Efficiency, Webb replied smoothly. Major Harris is brilliant but protective of her work. Sometimes it's faster to review documentation independently. Garrett let the explanation hang in the air, neither accepting nor rejecting it. The exercise tomorrow is critical, Mr. Webb. Iron Thunder's future depends on demonstrable performance advantages over conventional systems. I'm well aware, Colonel. Good. Then you'll understand why we take security and protocol so seriously. Garrett deliberately leaned against the console. How is Colonel Blackwood enjoying his new Pentagon position? The question, dropped casually but pointedly, caused Webb to stiffen slightly. I wouldn't know, sir. I report to quantum management, not directly to Colonel Blackwood. Of course, though I understand he maintains close relationships with Quantum's executive team. Garrett straightened. Don't stay too late, Mr. Webb. Tomorrow requires everyone at their best. As Garrett departed, he made a mental note to have Reynolds check the system logs for any unauthorized data transfers. Webb's presence was a constant reminder of the corporate and political interests surrounding Iron Thunder. Interests that might not align with the project's core mission of protecting soldiers' lives. The combat exercise began at dawn, with the command team establishing operations in a field headquarters 10 miles from the exercise zone. Harris and Webb manned the primary control stations, while Sanchez provided tactical guidance and Reynolds monitored the communication systems. Wilson had remained at the main facility, supervising the 3rd Tank's final preparations. General Howard was present as an observer, along with representatives from various Army commands interested in the technology's potential applications. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation as the remote tanks powered up and began moving toward their objectives. Iron Thunder 1, proceed to Phase Line Alpha, Garrett directed. Iron Thunder 2, provide overwatch from Hilltop 437. Harris acknowledged, her hands moving with practiced precision over the controls. On the tactical display, the 2 tanks moved in perfect coordination, navigating the challenging terrain of the exercise area. The opposing force consisted of a conventional tank company supported by mechanized infantry. Their mission was to prevent the Iron Thunder units from securing a strategic crossroads. The exercise had been designed to test not just the technical performance of the remote tanks, but their tactical integration into combined arms operations. For the first hour, the exercise progressed favorably. The remote tanks demonstrated mobility and target acquisition capabilities comparable to crewed vehicles. Their primary advantage became apparent when the opposing force called in simulated artillery strikes. The Iron Thunder operators continued functioning unaffected, while conventional tank crews had to button up, reducing their situational awareness. Garrett observed Webb carefully throughout the exercise. The man performed professionally, providing technical support without attempting to influence tactical decisions. If he was gathering intelligence for Quantum or Blackwood, he was being subtle about it. As the exercise entered its critical phase, with Iron Thunder 1 approaching the contested crossroads, Reynolds suddenly straightened at his monitoring station. Sir, we're experiencing signal degradation on both tanks. Garrett moved to his station immediately. Source, unknown, but it's affecting our primary and secondary frequencies. Harris reported simultaneously, control responsiveness dropping, latency increasing to 250 milliseconds. This was precisely the vulnerability Blackwood had been unable to overcome in his own program. Signal integrity under battlefield conditions. Garrett glanced at Webb, whose expression revealed nothing. Switch to tertiary communication channels, Garrett ordered. Narrowband frequency hopping protocol. Reynolds implemented the change swiftly. Switching now. For several tense seconds, the remote tanks sat motionless on the battlefield, vulnerable to the approaching opposition. Then the control interfaces reactivated, responsiveness returning to normal levels. Signal restored, Harris confirmed, relief evident in her voice. Resuming operations. The exercise continued, with the Iron Thunder vehicles ultimately securing their objective despite the temporary disruption. As the teams began recovery operations, General Howard approached Garrett. Impressive recovery, the general noted. Was that a planned test of redundant systems? No, sir, Garrett replied honestly. We experienced genuine signal interference. Howard's expression darkened. Natural interference or deliberate jamming. We're investigating, but the pattern suggests deliberate action. The general glanced toward Webb, who was engaged in conversation with Dr. Kovac across the command center. Interesting timing. Indeed, Garrett agreed, though it provided an opportunity to demonstrate our countermeasures. Howard nodded thoughtfully. The Pentagon delegation was impressed overall, particularly with the reduced risk to personnel while maintaining combat effectiveness. He lowered his voice. There's talk of accelerating deployment. Afghanistan is being considered as an initial operational area. The information caught Garrett by surprise. Afghanistan? That's an active combat zone. Precisely why it's being considered. Real-world validation under combat conditions. The implications were significant. Iron Thunder had been conceived as a training safety measure, then expanded to include combat engineering applications. Direct combat deployment represented another substantial evolution, and one that carried tremendous responsibility. How soon, Garrett asked. 6 months, potentially, depending on continued successful testing. After Howard departed, Garrett summoned Reynolds for a private conversation outside the command center. The signal interference, he began without preamble. Your assessment? Reynolds glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. Deliberate jamming, sir. Sophisticated, targeting our specific frequency bands. Source? Impossible to pinpoint precisely, but it originated within the exercise area. Someone with knowledge of our communication protocols. The implication was clear. Webb? I can't prove it, Reynolds admitted. But the timing is suspicious, coinciding with our approach to the objective. Almost like someone wanted to demonstrate a vulnerability without actually causing mission failure. A warning, Garrett interpreted, or a demonstration of capability. Either way, sir, it concerns me for future operations, especially if deployment to Afghanistan is being considered. Garrett shared the concern. Signal jamming during an exercise was one thing. In actual combat, it could be fatal. Develop countermeasures, multiple redundant systems, hardened against sophisticated jamming. If we deploy to a combat zone, our communications have to be absolutely secure. Yes, sir, I'll work with Dr. Kovac on advanced anti-jamming protocols. As Reynolds returned to the command center, Garrett remained outside, processing the implications of both the jamming incident and the potential Afghanistan deployment. Iron Thunder was accelerating toward actual combat operations faster than he had anticipated, bringing both opportunity and risk. The project that had begun as a promise to Master Sergeant Miller's family had evolved into something that could fundamentally change modern warfare. But with that potential came enormous responsibility. If Iron Thunder vehicles were deployed to Afghanistan, their performance would directly impact the safety of American troops and the success of combat missions. The following Saturday, as promised, Garrett welcomed David and Sarah Miller to the Iron Thunder facility. The boy's eyes widened as he entered the main bay, taking in the 3 massive tanks in various stages of modification. These are all controlled remotely? David asked, his voice filled with awe. That's right, Garrett confirmed. No crew inside, which means no risk to the operators. As he guided them through the facility, explaining the basics of the technology in terms appropriate for public discussion, Garrett was struck by David's attentiveness and insightful questions. The boy clearly inherited his father's sharp mind and interest in armored vehicles. This is where the operators sit, Garrett explained as they reached the control center. Major Harris designed the interface to feel like actually being inside a tank. David studied the control station with fascination, like a really advanced video game. Garrett smiled. Similar technology, but with much higher stakes. The operator needs to feel completely connected to the vehicle, even from miles away. Can I try it? David asked eagerly, just sitting in the seat. Garrett hesitated, then nodded. The system's powered down, but you can see how it's arranged. As David settled into the operator's chair, Sanchez wheeled himself over. Hello, young man. I'm Sergeant Sanchez, tactical advisor for Project Iron Thunder. You help drive the tanks? David asked. I help plan how they're used in combat, Sanchez explained. I was a tank commander before this. He gestured to his wheelchair. Got hit by an IED in Afghanistan. David nodded solemnly. Like my dad, he was killed in a training accident. Sanchez's expression softened. I know, Master Sergeant Miller. He was the reason this project started. Sarah, who had been quietly observing, placed a hand on her son's shoulder. Your father would be proud of what they've accomplished here. After the tour concluded, David conducted a brief interview with Garrett for his school project, asking prepared questions about military innovation and recording the answers on a small digital recorder. One last question, sir, David said as they finished. Do you think remote tanks will completely replace ones with people inside them someday? Garrett considered the question carefully. Technology changes, David, but the human element of warfare remains constant. Remote systems will save lives by taking soldiers out of the most dangerous situations, but I believe there will always be a role for human judgment on the battlefield. As the Millers prepared to leave, David surprised Garrett by handing him a small object, a tarnished challenge coin. It was my dad's, the boy explained, from his first tank unit. Mom said I could give it to you since you're continuing his work. Garrett accepted the coin with profound emotion, recognizing the significance of the gesture. I'll keep it with me, David. Thank you. After they departed, Garrett stood alone in his office, turning the challenge coin over in his fingers. The emblem of an armored division was still visible on its face, though worn from years of being carried. It was a tangible connection to Master Sergeant Miller, a reminder of the human lives affected by the technology they were developing. He placed the coin carefully in his pocket as Wilson entered with a troubled expression. "Problem?" Garrett asked immediately. Wilson handed him a tablet. Results of Reynolds' investigation into the signal jamming during the exercise, definitively traced to a portable device inside the exercise area. Webb? No concrete proof, but the device specifications match quantum proprietary technology. Garrett processed this information grimly. Evidence of the vulnerability without attribution. Clever. There's more, Wilson continued. Pentagon sources confirm Blackwood's meeting with the Afghanistan Deployment Planning Group next week. He's positioning himself to influence how Iron Thunder is utilized in theater. Not surprising, Garrett acknowledged. He can't stop the project, so he's maneuvering to control its implementation. Wilson's weathered face creased with concern. Bill, if Blackwood gains operational authority over Iron Thunder deployment, everything we've built could be compromised. He doesn't understand the technology like we do. Or worse, he understands it perfectly but has different priorities, Garrett added. Performance metrics and procurement contracts rather than soldier safety. They were interrupted by a call from General Howard, requesting Garrett's immediate presence at division headquarters. Upon arrival, Garrett found the general looking unusually grave. "You've been summoned to the Pentagon," Howard announced without preamble. "Deputy Secretary Ryder wants a personal briefing on Iron Thunder's combat readiness." "When?" "Tomorrow. The deployment timeline is being accelerated. Intelligence reports indicate increased IED activity along key supply routes in Afghanistan. They see Iron Thunder as a potential countermeasure." Garrett absorbed this development with mixed emotions. "We've demonstrated mine-clearing capability, but actual combat deployment requires additional testing. The Secretary of Defense is pushing for rapid implementation. Transformational technology shouldn't sit in development while soldiers die in the field," were his exact words. And Blackwood's involvement? Howard's expression confirmed Garrett's concerns. "He's been named Special Advisor to the Deployment Planning Group, officially to provide expertise from his own unmanned vehicle research. And unofficially, to ensure Quantum's role in the program remains secure." Howard sighed. "Politics, Bill, always politics." The next day, Garrett found himself in the Pentagon, navigating the labyrinthine corridors to the office of the Deputy Secretary of Defense. He had brought Harris with him for technical expertise, while Wilson remained at Fort Hood overseeing continued development. The briefing room contained a mixture of military and civilian officials, including representatives from various combat commands and defense agencies. Blackwood was present, looking entirely comfortable in his new environment, his uniform adorned with the insignia of his Pentagon position. Deputy Secretary Ryder opened the meeting efficiently. "Colonel Garrett, thank you for coming on short notice. We're evaluating Iron Thunder for immediate deployment to Afghanistan to counter the IED threat facing our convoys. I need your honest assessment of the system's readiness." Garrett appreciated the directness. "Sir, Iron Thunder has demonstrated excellent performance in controlled testing environments. The mine-clearing configuration has successfully neutralized various explosive devices under simulated combat conditions." "But," Ryder prompted, sensing the qualification, "but deployment to an active combat zone requires additional hardening against electronic countermeasures, comprehensive integration with existing tactical networks, and thorough training of remote operators. I would recommend a 3-month preparation period before deployment." Blackwood spoke up immediately. "Mr. Secretary, if I may, my analysis suggests Iron Thunder could be deployed within 30 days if we accelerate certain testing phases. The urgent need in theater justifies accepting moderate technical risk." Garrett recognized the maneuver. Blackwood was positioning himself as the enabler, the one willing to cut through caution to get the technology to the troops quickly. It was politically astute but technically irresponsible. "Major Harris," Garrett said, turning to his control systems expert, "please explain the communications security concerns for Afghan deployment." Harris outlined the sophisticated jamming capabilities that insurgent forces had demonstrated against other U.S. systems, emphasizing the catastrophic consequences if a remote vehicle lost connection during a mine-clearing operation. "Our current estimate," she concluded, "is 60 days minimum to implement and test the necessary countermeasures. Any shorter time frame substantially increases operational risk." The discussion continued, with various officials weighing in on the balance between urgent need and technical readiness. Throughout, Garrett observed Blackwood carefully inserting points that emphasized speed over caution, subtly shifting the conversation toward his preferred outcome. Finally, Ryder raised a hand, silencing the debate. I appreciate the candid assessments. Colonel Garrett, I understand your technical concerns. However, the tactical situation in Afghanistan is deteriorating. We've lost 12 soldiers to IEDs in the past month alone. He made eye contact with each person in the room before continuing. I'm authorizing deployment of Iron Thunder to Bagram Air Base in 45 days. Colonel Blackwood will coordinate the integration with the theater command, while Colonel Garrett's team will address the technical hardening requirements. It was a compromise, but one that still compressed the timeline dangerously. More concerning was Blackwood's designated role in deployment planning. After the meeting adjourned, Garrett found himself face-to-face with Blackwood in the hallway outside. 45 days, Blackwood remarked with casual confidence. Ambitious but achievable, don't you think? With proper resources and focus, Garrett replied neutrally. Of course, proper implementation will require close coordination between your technical team and my operational planners. Blackwood's smile was practiced, diplomatic. I'm looking forward to our collaboration. The word felt wrong in Blackwood's mouth, a euphemism for control and credit-taking. My priority remains the safety of the operators and troops in theater, Garrett stated firmly. As does mine, Blackwood assured him, though his eyes remained cold. Iron Thunder represents a significant advancement. Its success or failure will shape unmanned vehicle development for the next decade. That at least was undoubtedly true, and it explained Blackwood's maneuvering. He was positioning himself to influence that future, regardless of which program provided the technology. 45 days isn't much time, Blackwood added. I suggest you focus on the technical hardening while my team handles the deployment logistics. Division of labor for efficiency's sake. The suggestion was reasonable on the surface, but Garrett recognized the strategy. Separate him from the operational planning, reduce his influence over how Iron Thunder would actually be used in theater. We'll coordinate closely on all aspects, Garrett countered. The technical and operational elements are deeply intertwined. Before Blackwood could respond, Major Harris approached, ending the conversation. As they departed the Pentagon, she voiced the concern Garrett was already contemplating. He's isolating us from the deployment planning, sir. Yes, Garrett agreed, which means we need to be absolutely bulletproof on the technical side. No vulnerabilities he can exploit. The return to Fort Hood brought a frenzy of activity. The 45-day deadline created tremendous pressure to address the remaining technical challenges while preparing for deployment. Garrett restructured the team, focusing Wilson and Harris on communication security, Reynolds on control system hardening, and Sanchez on developing operational protocols for the Afghan environment. Webb and the other integrated personnel continued their involvement, though Garrett instituted stricter information compartmentalization, limiting access to critical systems. If Blackwood was receiving intelligence from within the project, it would now be incomplete at best. 3 weeks into the accelerated timeline, Garrett received an unexpected visit from Thomas Ryder. The deputy secretary arrived without entourage, requesting a private tour of the facility. Impressive progress, Ryder commented, as they observed the modified tanks undergoing final preparations. Your team has accomplished in months what traditional acquisition programs take years to achieve. They're exceptional people who believe in the mission, Garrett replied. And the mission is changing, Ryder noted, stopping to watch Harris calibrating a control interface. From safety improvement to combat deployment, how do you feel about that evolution? The question seemed genuine, not political. Mixed emotions, Garrett admitted. Pride in what we've created, concern about the accelerated timeline, responsibility for how it performs in theater. Ryder nodded thoughtfully. Colonel Blackwood speaks highly of the technology, though he has concerns about your team's operational experience. With respect, sir, my team includes combat veterans with direct experience in the environments where Iron Thunder will deploy. Blackwood's program has never left the test range. A fair point. Ryder studied Garrett carefully. You don't trust him. It wasn't a question. I trust his ambitions, sir. It's predictable and constant. Ryder smiled slightly at the diplomatic evasion. The Pentagon is a complex ecosystem, Colonel. Programs compete for resources and attention. But ultimately, performance in the field determines success, which is why I'm focused on ensuring Iron Thunder performs flawlessly in Afghanistan. Good. Ryder's expression became more serious. Because I've authorized deployment of 2 units, not the 4 Blackwood recommended. I want proven results before committing additional resources. This was significant information. Blackwood had been pushing for larger deployment without informing Garrett. 2 units is appropriate for initial operational testing, he agreed. I thought so. Ryder checked his watch. I have another meeting, but I wanted to see the project firsthand. Impressive work, Colonel. Keep focused on the technology and let the politics take care of themselves. After Ryder departed, Garrett pondered the deputy secretary's subtle message. It seemed he was aware of the dynamics between Iron Thunder and Blackwood's faction and was keeping his own counsel on the matter. 2 units instead of 4 represented a more cautious approach than Blackwood had advocated, a small victory for Garrett's perspective. The final weeks before deployment passed in a blur of activity. Technical modifications were completed, hardened communication systems tested, and operators trained on the enhanced interfaces. Garrett worked tirelessly, dividing his time between technical oversight and navigating the complex deployment logistics. Blackwood remained involved primarily from Washington, occasionally visiting to observe progress, but focusing mainly on the operational planning aspects. His approach remained professional but distant, revealing little about his ultimate intentions for Iron Thunder's combat debut. The night before the 2 completed units were scheduled for transport to Afghanistan, Garrett found himself alone in the maintenance bay, conducting a final inspection of the vehicles. Each had been transformed from obsolete training tanks into sophisticated remote combat engineering vehicles, equipped with mine-clearing attachments and hardened control systems. Wilson joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Can't sleep either? Garrett accepted the coffee gratefully. Too much on my mind. They walked slowly around the nearest tank, its fresh desert camouflage paint reflecting the overhead lights. Remember when this was just about making target practice safer? Wilson remarked. Seems like another lifetime. James Miller would be proud, Wilson said quietly. His sacrifice led to something important. Garrett felt the weight of the challenge coin in his pocket, a tangible reminder of their original purpose. I hope so, though this wasn't what I envisioned it when we started. Few things worth doing end up exactly as planned. Wilson placed a hand on the tank's hull, but the core mission remains the same, protecting soldiers. Whether from training accidents or IEDs, the principle is identical. Garrett nodded, finding wisdom in the older man's perspective. You're right, though the stakes are considerably higher now. Always are when you transition from testing to combat. Wilson sipped his coffee reflectively. You know, Blackwood will take credit if this succeeds. Probably, but that's not why we're doing this. No, Wilson agreed. We're doing it because it's necessary, because men like James Miller deserve better than to die unnecessarily. The following morning, the 2 Iron Thunder vehicles were loaded onto transport aircraft bound for Bagram Air Base. Garrett, Harris, Reynolds, and Webb would follow on a separate flight, while Wilson and Sanchez remained at Fort Hood to continue development work on the remaining units. The deployment team arrived in Afghanistan 3 days later, emerging from the aircraft into the harsh sunlight and dusty air of Bagram. The massive airbase hummed with activity, a stark contrast to the rugged mountains visible in the distance. Colonel Michael Torres, the base commander, greeted them personally. Colonel Garrett, welcome to Bagram. Your equipment arrived yesterday and has been secured in the designated facility. Thank you, Colonel. We're eager to begin final preparations for operational deployment. Torres nodded. You'll be supporting Task Force Sentinel, conducting route clearance along Highway 1. They've had 7 IED incidents in the past month alone. When is our first mission scheduled? Garrett inquired. 3 days from now. Convoy movement to forward operating base Condor, approximately 70 miles from here. Torres glanced at his watch. Colonel Blackwood arrived yesterday. He's waiting for you at the operations center. Garrett exchanged a brief look with Harris. Blackwood's early arrival was unexpected and concerning. We'll report there after inspecting our equipment. The Iron Thunder vehicles had been placed in a secure maintenance facility on the edge of the base. Both had survived the transport intact, though Garrett insisted on comprehensive diagnostics before any operational deployment. Harris and Reynolds immediately began systems checks while Webb observed the process. Everything looks nominal, Harris reported after an hour of testing. Communication systems are functioning within parameters, and the control interfaces are properly calibrated. Good, Garrett acknowledged. Let's meet with Blackwood and get a better understanding of the operational parameters. They found Blackwood in the Tactical Operations Center, surrounded by maps and mission planning documents. He greeted them with professional courtesy that didn't reach his eyes. Colonel Garrett, good of you to join us. We've been finalizing the mission profile for Iron Thunder's combat debut. The emphasis on "we" wasn't subtle. Blackwood had clearly been inserting himself into the operational planning during the days before Garrett's arrival. I'd appreciate a full briefing, Garrett requested. My team needs to understand exactly what conditions the vehicles will face. Blackwood gestured to the map table. Route clearance along this 10-mile stretch of Highway 1, preceding a resupply convoy to Phobie Condor. Intelligence indicates high probability of IEDs placed overnight by insurgent elements from these villages. He continued detailing the mission parameters, displaying a thorough understanding of the tactical situation. Whatever Garrett might think of Blackwood's motivations, his military competence was undeniable. The Iron Thunder vehicles will operate approximately 1 kilometer ahead of the main convoy, Blackwood explained. Remote operation from this forward command post, which provides optimal line of sight for communications while maintaining operator safety. Garrett studied the map, identifying potential trouble spots. What about these elevated positions overlooking the highway? They could provide jamming opportunities for insurgent forces. We've tasked surveillance drones to monitor those areas before and during the operation, Blackwood assured him. Any suspicious activity will trigger immediate response from QRF units. The briefing continued for another hour, covering contingencies and support elements. Throughout, Garrett noted Blackwood's careful positioning of Iron Thunder as an integrated element of a larger operation, one that he, Blackwood, was clearly overseeing. After the briefing concluded, Garrett pulled Harrison Reynolds aside for a private assessment. Thoughts? He asked simply. The mission parameters are reasonable, Harris acknowledged. Our systems can handle the requirements. Reynolds looked less certain. The communication plan relies heavily on line-of-sight transmission. If the forward command post is compromised, we'd need to switch to satellite uplink, which introduces latency. Noted. Ensure the satellite backup systems are fully tested before deployment. Garrett considered their position carefully. Blackwood has established himself firmly in the command structure here. We need to focus on technical performance and let the operational results speak for themselves. The next 2 days were consumed with final preparations. The Iron Thunder vehicles underwent extensive testing in the Afghan environment, with particular attention to dust mitigation and communications reliability. Harrison Reynolds worked with the operators who would control the vehicles, ensuring they understood both the capabilities and limitations of the system. Garrett divided his time between technical oversight in coordination with Task Force Sentinel, the combat unit they would be supporting. The task force commander, Lieutenant Colonel Garcia, proved receptive to the new technology, but appropriately cautious about relying on unproven systems. My men's lives will depend on these machines clearing the route effectively, Garcia emphasized during their meeting. I need to know they won't fail at a critical moment. I understand completely, Pom, Garrett assured him. We've designed redundant systems specifically to prevent catastrophic failure. Even in a worst-case communications loss, the vehicles are programmed to execute safe shutdown rather than unpredictable behavior. The night before the mission, Garrett conducted a final inspection of the vehicles and control systems. Everything was in readiness, the technology prepared for its first true combat test. As he completed his rounds, he found Blackwood examining one of the tanks, running a hand along the modified turret. Impressive machines, Blackwood commented without turning. A credit to your team's ingenuity. Thank you, Garrett replied, surprised by the seeming sincerity. Tomorrow will be historic, Blackwood continued. The first deployment of American remotely operated tanks in combat conditions. It will change the future of warfare, regardless of the specific outcome. Our focus remains on the specific outcome, Garrett countered, clearing routes safely to protect the convoy. Blackwood turned to face him directly. Of course, but you're a student of military history, Bill. You understand the significance of what we're doing here. For once, his expression seemed genuinely animated by something beyond political calculation. This is like the first deployment of tanks at Cambrai or the first helicopter assault in Korea. A fundamental shift in how war is conducted. Garrett was struck by the realization that beneath the ambition and political maneuvering, Blackwood genuinely believed in the technology's transformative potential. Their methods and motivations might differ, but on this fundamental point, they shared a perspective. If it works as intended, Garrett acknowledged, it will save lives while maintaining combat effectiveness. That's a worthwhile legacy. For a brief moment, professional respect transcended their rivalry. Then Blackwood checked his watch, the moment passing. 0600 briefing tomorrow. The Pentagon will be watching this operation closely. Dawn at Bagram brought clear skies and already rising temperatures as the operational teams assembled for final briefing. Garrett stood with Harris at the forward command post. a hardened structure positioned to maintain optimal communications with the Iron Thunder vehicles. Reynolds monitored the secure communication systems, while Webb observed from a position near Blackwood. Task Force Sentinel's conventional vehicles formed up behind the staging area. Humvees, MRAPs, and supply trucks that would follow once Iron Thunder had cleared the route. Lieutenant Colonel Garcia approached Garrett for a final confirmation. "Your systems ready, Colonel?" "All green, sir. We're prepared to begin route clearance on your order." Garcia nodded grimly. "Let's move out. Maintain communication throughout the operation." At precisely 0730, Harris activated the remote systems. The two Iron Thunder vehicles rumbled to life, their engines echoing across the staging area. With precise control inputs, she guided them onto the highway, positioning them in clearance formation 1 kilometer ahead of the main convoy. "Iron Thunder moving," she reported, "all systems nominal." On the tactical displays, Garrett watched as the tanks advanced methodically along Highway 1. The dusty, rock-strewn roads stretched through barren terrain punctuated by occasional clusters of mud brick buildings. The mine-clearing attachments extended before each vehicle, scanning and probing for hidden explosives. 30 minutes into the operation, the first detection occurred. The lead tank's sensors identified an anomaly beneath the road surface approximately 50 meters ahead. "Potential IED, grid coordinates Tango 47, Harris reported calmly, initiating clearance protocol. With meticulous precision, she maneuvered the tank into position. The manipulator arm extended, carefully removing layers of dirt and debris to expose the threat. A crude but lethal explosive device connected to a pressure plate. "Confirmed IED, Reynolds announced. Composition appears to be artillery shell with improvised detonator. Using the specialized attachment, Harris neutralized the detonator before carefully removing the device from the roadbed. The entire procedure took 12 minutes. Significantly faster than a human EOD team could have accomplished in full protective gear. "Route clear to continue," she confirmed. Blackwood, who had been observing from the Tactical Operations Center, radioed his approval. "Excellent work. Pentagon observers are impressed with the precision of the neutralization." The operation continued successfully for the next hour, with 3 additional IEDs detected and neutralized. Iron Thunder was performing beyond expectations, validating the technology under actual combat conditions. Then, as the vehicles approached a narrow section of highway bordered by steep hills on both sides, Reynolds detected an anomaly. "Signal interference on primary channel," he reported urgently. "Pattern consistent with deliberate jamming." Garrett had anticipated this possibility. "Switch to secondary encrypted channel. Activate anti-jamming protocols." Harris implemented the change immediately. Secondary channel engaged, maintaining control. For several tense seconds, the vehicles continued their advance, the jamming growing more intense as they moved deeper into the vulnerable section of road. Then a more powerful burst of interference hit, temporarily freezing the control interfaces. "We're losing them," Harris warned, fingers flying across the backup systems. "Tertiary channel engaging." The redundant systems Garrett had insisted upon activated automatically, rerouting control signals through satellite uplink. The momentary latency was noticeable but manageable, allowing Harris to maintain operational control despite the sophisticated jamming. "Command post, this is Sentinel Actual," Garcia's voice crackled over the radio. "We're receiving small arms fire from the eastern ridgeline. Possible enemy force attempting to ambush the convoy." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Iron Thunder had become the target of a coordinated attack, electronic warfare combined with direct fire, designed to disable the remote vehicles and trap the following convoy in a kill zone. "Continue route clearance," Garrett ordered Harris. "Reynolds, triangulate the jamming source." "Eastern Ridge, approximately 2 kilometers from our position," Reynolds reported after a moment. "Single-point source, likely mobile equipment." Garrett made a rapid tactical decision. "Lieutenant Colonel Garcia, request permission to divert Iron Thunder 2 to neutralize the jamming source. Iron Thunder 1 will continue route clearance." Garcia's response was immediate. "Permission granted. We're suppressing the small arms fire, but that jamming is our biggest threat right now." With Garrett's direction, Harris adjusted the mission profile. The second tank diverted from the highway, climbing the rough terrain toward the eastern ridge, where the jamming signal originated. "This exceeds the mission parameters," Blackwood interjected from the Tactical Operations Center. "Iron Thunder is tasked with route clearance, not offensive operations." "The route cannot be cleared while under electronic attack," Garrett countered firmly. "This is within mission scope." Before Blackwood could argue further, Iron Thunder 2 crested the ridge. its cameras revealing a small team of insurgents operating a sophisticated jamming device from the back of a pickup truck. The tank's appearance triggered immediate panic, with the insurgents abandoning their equipment and fleeing in the vehicle. Jamming source located, Harris reported. Insurgents retreating. Neutralize the equipment, Garrett ordered. With precision, born of months of development and training, Harris used the tank's manipulator arm to render the abandoned jamming device inoperable. Immediately, the interference affecting Iron Thunder 1 ceased completely. Primary communications restored, Reynolds confirmed. Full control functionality returned. With the electronic threat eliminated, the operation resumed its original parameters. Iron Thunder 1 continued methodically clearing the road, identifying and neutralizing 2 more IEDs before reaching the designated endpoint near Phobe Condor. The convoy followed safely, arriving without casualties or damage. As the dust settled on the successful mission, the command center erupted in congratulatory exchanges. Lieutenant Colonel Garcia personally radioed his appreciation. Outstanding work, Iron Thunder. Your vehicle saved lives today, no question about it. Even Blackwood acknowledged the success, though his expression remained carefully measured. Impressive performance, particularly the adaptive response to the jamming threat. The Pentagon observers are extremely pleased. In the days that followed, Iron Thunder conducted 5 additional missions, each successful and each building confidence in the system's combat effectiveness. News of the technology spread throughout the theater, with multiple unit commanders requesting Iron Thunder support for their operations. 2 weeks after the initial deployment, Garrett received orders to return to Washington for a high-level briefing on the program's future. Before departing, he visited both vehicles in the maintenance bay, examining them with professional pride. They bore the dust and minor damage of actual combat operations now, transformed from theoretical prototypes to battle-proven systems. Harris joined him, her usual professional demeanor softened by satisfaction. They performed better than I anticipated, she admitted. The control systems maintain 95% efficiency even under jamming conditions. Your algorithms made that possible, Garrett acknowledged. The redundant communication protocols were the difference between success and failure. What happens now with your Pentagon briefing? Garrett considered the question carefully. Expansion, most likely. More units, broader deployment. Iron Thunder has proven itself in actual combat conditions. The Pentagon won't ignore that kind of success. And Blackwood? He'll position himself to influence the expansion. Take credit where possible. Garrett shrugged slightly. But the technology speaks for itself. Our approach worked decisively. The return to Washington brought Garrett to a very different briefing than his previous Pentagon visit. Instead of defending the technology's readiness, he found himself presenting success metrics to an expanded audience of military leaders and defense officials. Blackwood was present, now wearing the insignia of a newly promoted brigadier general. Deputy Secretary Ryder opened the session with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. Gentlemen, Iron Thunder has exceeded all operational expectations in Afghanistan. 7 successful missions, 23 IEDs neutralized, and not a single casualty among supported units. By any measure, this qualifies as a transformative capability. The briefing proceeded with Garrett providing detailed performance analysis, while Blackwood offered strategic implementation perspectives. Despite their continued professional rivalry, the shared success had created a functional working relationship focused on the technology's future. After the formal briefing, Ryder requested a private conversation with Garrett. The Secretary of Defense has authorized full production implementation, Ryder informed him once they were alone. 30 additional units in the next fiscal year, with deployment to all major combat theaters. That's excellent news, sir. There's more. We're establishing a dedicated unmanned ground systems command to oversee all related technologies. General Blackwood will serve as Deputy Commander for Strategic Integration. Garrett maintained his professional demeanor despite the revelation of Blackwood's new role, a logical choice given his background. And you, Colonel, are being promoted to Brigade Commander of the Iron Thunder Operational Group. You'll oversee all technical development and combat deployment of the systems your team pioneered. The news was unexpected. Thank you, sir. I'm honored. You've earned it, Ryder said simply. You took a concept born from tragedy and transformed it into a technology that's saving lives daily. That's the kind of innovation the modern military needs. Before departing Washington, Garrett visited Arlington National Cemetery. Among the endless rows of white headstones, he found the one bearing James Miller's name. As he stood in silent tribute, he felt the weight of the challenge coin in his pocket. the tangible connection between the project's beginning and its current success. He placed the coin momentarily on the headstone. "We did it, Sergeant," he said quietly. "Iron Thunder is operational, protecting soldiers just as we intended. Your sacrifice wasn't in vain." Retrieving the coin, Garrett turned to find an unexpected figure watching from a respectful distance, General Blackwood. The newly promoted officer approached slowly, stopping a few paces away. "Master Sergeant Miller," Blackwood noted, reading the headstone. "The target tank operator whose death inspired Iron Thunder." "Yes," Garrett confirmed simply. Blackwood was silent for a moment, seemingly contemplating the rows of headstones stretching into the distance. "We've had our differences, Bill, professional and philosophical. But I want you to know I never lost sight of the ultimate purpose: protecting soldiers like Miller." The acknowledgement was unexpected, a rare glimpse of the man beneath the ambition. "I believe you," Garrett replied, surprising himself with the realization that he meant it. "Our competition pushed the technology further, faster than either of us could have achieved alone," Blackwood continued. "The results speak for themselves. 23 IEDs that didn't kill American soldiers." Garrett nodded, unable to disagree. Different approaches, same objective. "In the end, that's what matters." Blackwood extended his hand. "I look forward to our continued collaboration, Colonel. The future of warfare is changing, and we're writing that chapter together." As they shook hands among the silent witnesses of Arlington, Garrett reflected on the journey from a broken-down M60 in a Fort Hood maintenance bay to a combat-proven system saving lives in Afghanistan. Iron Thunder had evolved far beyond its original concept, becoming something neither he nor Blackwood had fully envisioned at the outset. The technology would continue to develop, with new capabilities and applications emerging as it matured. The rivalry between different approaches would persist, as it should in any healthy innovation ecosystem. But the fundamental purpose remained unchanged: protecting American soldiers from unnecessary risk while maintaining combat effectiveness. For an old tanker like Garrett, there could be no worthier legacy. The metal beast that had defined his military career had evolved into something new. A Baumwollwagen, unmanned, remote, yet still essential to the modern battlefield. And in that evolution, the human element remained paramount, not eliminated but elevated, protected from risk while empowered to accomplish the mission. As he departed Arlington, the Miller family's challenge coin secure in his pocket, Garrett felt a sense of completion. The promise made at a funeral had been fulfilled, transformed into something that would protect countless soldiers in conflicts yet to come. Project Iron Thunder had begun with a single purpose: to prevent another James Miller from dying unnecessarily. In achieving that purpose, it had changed the future of warfare itself.